The mirror effect. The mirror effect is one of the most powerful yet subtle psychological techniques for influencing and building rapport with others. At its core, it is the act of subtly imitating someone's body language, speech patterns, or emotional state in a way that makes them feel more connected to you. Humans are naturally drawn to familiarity, and when we see someone mirroring our behaviors, we subconsciously interpret it as a sign of similarity and trustworthiness. This makes the mirror effect a potent tool in persuasion, manipulation, and social influence. The reason this technique works so well lies in our evolutionary wiring. From an early age, human beings are programmed to mimic others as a way to connect and learn. This is why babies mirror their parents' facial expressions, why friends unconsciously adopt each other's mannerisms, and why romantic partners begin to sync their habits over time. Our brain is equipped with mirror neurons that fire when we observe others, allowing us to feel what they feel and relate to them on a deeper level. When used deliberately, mirroring can shape the way people perceive you, making them more likely to trust, agree, and even comply with your requests. One of the most common applications of the mirror effect is in body language. If someone leans forward while speaking, you lean forward as well. If they cross their legs, you cross yours a moment later. If they use hand gestures while explaining something, you integrate similar movements into your response. The key to effective mirroring is subtlety. If the mimicry is too obvious, it feels unnatural and can backfire. When done correctly, however, it creates a sense of harmony and makes the other person feel deeply understood, even if they don't consciously realize why. Beyond physical gestures, the mirror effect extends to speech patterns. If someone speaks in a slow and measured way, adjusting your own pace to match theirs increases the likelihood that they will feel comfortable around you. If they use casual or formal language, mirroring their tone can create an instant sense of familiarity. Even using similar words or phrases helps in building an unconscious bond. Another powerful aspect of the mirror effect is emotional mirroring. Humans instinctively gravitate toward those who reflect their emotions. If someone shares an exciting story, mirroring their enthusiasm makes them feel validated and closer to you. If they express frustration or sadness, responding with a similar tone rather than trying to shift the mood right away makes them feel understood. This technique is frequently used in therapy, negotiation, and sales to gain trust and steer conversations in a desired direction. The mirror effect is widely used in persuasion and influence, often without people even realizing it. Salespeople, politicians, and leaders master the art of mirroring to make their audience feel connected and receptive to their message. In social situations, mirroring accelerates bonding, making it useful for networking, dating, and conflict resolution. It's also used in high-stakes negotiations, where subtly mimicking the opponent's posture or speech patterns can lower their defenses and create a subconscious sense of alignment. However, there is a darker side to this technique. Manipulators and con artists use mirroring to create a false sense of trust, making their victims believe they have found someone who truly understands them. They mirror interests, opinions, and emotional states to build a connection, only to exploit that trust later. The key to avoiding such manipulation is awareness. If someone mirrors you too perfectly, too quickly, it might not be genuine. If they seem to shift their personality depending on who they are talking to, they could be using the mirror effect deceptively. Used ethically, the mirror effect is an incredible tool for strengthening relationships, making great first impressions, and influencing people naturally. When done subtly, it creates effortless rapport and makes interactions smoother, whether in professional settings or personal relationships. Understanding how and when to use mirroring can make you more persuasive, more likable, and more in control of social dynamics. The foot in the door technique. The foot in the door technique is a psychological trick that works by getting someone to agree to a small request first, which then increases the likelihood that they will agree to a larger request later. It relies on the principle of commitment and consistency. Once a person says yes to something minor, they feel an internal pressure to stay consistent with that decision, making them more open to complying with bigger asks. This technique is one of the most effective ways to shape behavior without direct confrontation, making it a favorite tool in persuasion, marketing, and manipulation. The human mind dislikes inconsistency. When someone commits to an action, they unconsciously start seeing themselves as the kind of person who supports that idea. This shift in self-perception is what makes the foot in the door technique so effective. If a person agrees to sign a petition supporting environmental protection, they now see themselves as someone who cares about the cause. Later, when asked to donate money to the same cause, they are much more likely to say yes because rejecting it would feel inconsistent with their earlier commitment. This technique is used everywhere, from sales and marketing to relationships and social influence. Charities often ask for small commitments, like signing up for an email newsletter before asking for donations. Free trials and sample products work on the same principle. Once you start using a product, you are more likely to subscribe or buy it. Salespeople first ask for something small, such as trying on a jacket, knowing that once you commit to trying it, you will feel more inclined to purchase it. The foot in the door technique also plays a significant role in personal and workplace dynamics. A coworker may ask for a minor favor, like reviewing a short document, before later requesting help with a larger project. A friend may ask you to lend them a small amount of money before eventually asking for a much bigger sum. In relationships, people often start with small control tactics before escalating to greater demands, which is how manipulation and coercion can gradually take hold. One reason this technique is so effective is that each request feels like a natural progression. The change happens in increments, preventing the target from feeling manipulated. If a stranger asks you for a large favor out of nowhere, you're likely to refuse. But if they first establish a pattern of smaller agreements, each new request feels less significant than it actually is. The dark side of the foot in the door technique lies in its potential for exploitation. Cults, scams, and manipulative individuals use this strategy to slowly break down a person's resistance. They begin with small, harmless requests to gain trust and commitment, then escalate to more extreme demands, knowing that once a person is invested, they are less likely to back out. Many fraud schemes start with a minor purchase or a small investment before pressuring the victim into larger financial commitments. Abusive relationships can develop similarly, with minor controlling behaviors leading to full-scale emotional or physical control. Recognizing when the foot in the door technique is being used on you can help you avoid falling into psychological traps. If you find yourself agreeing to progressively larger requests without fully thinking them through, it's important to step back and assess whether you are making a decision based on genuine desire or subconscious consistency bias. Learning to say no at any stage, even after agreeing to the first request, is key to maintaining control over your own choices. When used ethically, this technique can be a powerful way to influence behavior for positive outcomes. It helps form good habits, encourage responsibility, and strengthen long-term commitments. However, when used manipulatively, it can turn into a dangerous tool for control and exploitation. Being aware of how it works allows you to both use it effectively and protect yourself from its darker applications. The door in the face technique. The door in the face technique is a psychological strategy that involves making a deliberately large request first, expecting rejection, and then following it up with a much smaller request that the person is far more likely to accept. The key to its effectiveness lies in the contrast between the two requests. The first one seems excessive and unreasonable, while the second appears modest and reasonable by comparison. This technique works because of the psychological principle of reciprocity. When someone denies an initial request, they feel a subconscious need to meet you halfway by accepting the smaller one. This method is frequently used in sales, negotiations, and social persuasion. A classic example is a salesperson offering a high-priced product first, knowing that the customer will likely refuse. Once rejected, they introduce a cheaper alternative, which now seems like a much better deal in contrast to the first option. Similarly, a charity might start by asking for a large donation, such as $500, expecting the person to say no. When they follow up with a much smaller request, perhaps $20, the person is more likely to agree, feeling as though they are still contributing while avoiding the discomfort of rejecting everything entirely. Beyond business and sales, the door-in-the-face technique is commonly used in everyday social interactions. A teenager might ask their parents for an expensive gift, knowing it will be turned down, only to then request something more affordable. Because the second request is significantly smaller, the parents are more likely to say yes. The same principle applies in workplace negotiations. An employee might first ask for a 20% raise, expecting rejection, and then settle for a 10% increase, which now seems much more reasonable. The reason this technique is so effective lies in the psychological discomfort that comes with rejecting a request outright. Humans are social creatures who prefer to maintain positive interactions. When we say no to a big request, we feel a subconscious obligation to offer some level of cooperation when a follow-up request is made. This is why the second request, even if it was the real goal all along, often gets accepted. However, the door-in-the-face technique can also be used in manipulative ways. In toxic relationships or manipulative environments, people may use this tactic to make unreasonable demands first, making their actual desired outcome seem like a compromise. For example, a controlling partner might initially forbid their significant other from going out at all, knowing that when they compromise and allow them to go out under strict conditions, it will seem like a fair middle ground. In reality, the end result is still control, but the victim is more likely to accept it because it seems less severe compared to the original restriction. To avoid falling victim to this technique, it's important to recognize when someone is setting up an intentionally exaggerated request. If the initial request seems absurd or clearly unrealistic, it may not be a genuine ask, but rather a psychological setup. Understanding this tactic allows you to step back and evaluate whether the second request is truly reasonable or if you're simply being guided into compliance through contrast manipulation. Despite its potential for manipulation, the door-in-the-face technique isn't inherently unethical. It can be used in positive ways, such as encouraging people to take action they might otherwise resist. A teacher might ask students to complete an extensive project, knowing that when they scale it down to a more manageable task, the students will be more likely to engage. Charities and nonprofit organizations often use this strategy to maximize donations while still ensuring that people contribute at some level. Mastering the door-in-the-face technique can make you more persuasive and better at negotiations, but understanding how it works also protects you from being subtly coerced into decisions you wouldn't normally make. It's a psychological dance between rejection and acceptance, and those who know how to use it effectively often hold the upper hand in social and professional interactions. The Zynic Effect. The Zynic Effect is a psychological phenomenon that explains why unfinished tasks, unresolved thoughts, and incomplete experiences tend to linger in our minds far more than completed ones. Named after Russian psychologist Bluma Zygarnik, who first observed this effect, the principle states that our brains hold on to unfinished business with a sense of urgency, creating an internal tension that pushes us to complete what we started. This effect is why we can remember details of a task we left incomplete far more vividly than one we finished without interruption. One of the most common examples of the Zygarnik effect occurs in entertainment. Cliffhangers in television shows are a perfect illustration of this principle at work. When an episode ends with unresolved tension, such as a shocking revelation or an unanswered question, the audience is left in a state of psychological discomfort. Their brains continue processing the unfinished storyline, making them eager to watch the next episode to resolve the tension. This is why binge watching is so addictive. The moment a show leaves something incomplete, the mind struggles to let go until closure is achieved. This effect also plays a significant role in productivity and motivation. Many people find it difficult to start working on a task, but once they begin, the Zygarnik effect kicks in. The brain recognizes that something has been left incomplete and keeps nudging the individual to finish it. This is why starting a project, even if it's just a small step, can make it easier to follow through. Writers often use this trick by stopping their writing in the middle of a sentence rather than at a natural stopping point. When they return, their brain is already engaged with where they left off, making it easier to continue rather than staring at a blank page. Marketers and advertisers also leverage the Zygarnik effect to capture attention and create curiosity. Headlines like "The secret to success that no one talks about" or "You won't believe what happened next" trigger the brain's need for closure, compelling people to click on an article or watch a video. Similarly, sales strategies often include open-ended offers, such as "limited time deal, find out more inside," making customers feel like they need to continue engaging to get the full information. The Zygarnik effect isn't just about external influences. It also affects internal thoughts and emotions. When someone experiences an argument or unresolved tension in a relationship, their brain keeps replaying the situation, searching for closure. This is why people often dwell on unfinished conversations, thinking about what they could have said or done differently. Unresolved emotions create mental loops that are difficult to escape until some form of closure is achieved. The dark side of the Zygarnik effect is that it can contribute to stress, anxiety, and overthinking. People who struggle with perfectionism often experience heightened effects of this phenomenon, as their minds constantly fixate on what still needs to be completed. It's also a key factor in why intrusive thoughts persist. When the brain perceives an emotional or cognitive task as unfinished, it keeps bringing it back into awareness. This is why certain forms of therapy, such as cognitive behavioral techniques, focus on reframing unresolved issues or consciously closing mental loops to reduce psychological distress. Understanding the Zygarnik effect can be a game changer for productivity and mental well-being. One way to use it positively is by deliberately starting a task even when motivation is low. Once engaged, the brain will naturally push for completion. Similarly, breaking larger tasks into smaller, unfinished segments can keep motivation high. If something feels mentally overwhelming, setting up a to-be-continued mindset rather than a start-from-scratch approach makes following through easier. The Zygarnik effect is also why making lists and externalizing tasks onto paper helps free up mental space. When people rely solely on memory to track unfinished work, their brain remains in a state of constant tension. Writing things down provides a sense of external closure, reducing the mental load and making it easier to focus. By recognizing how the Zygarnik effect influences thoughts, behaviors, and emotions, individuals can gain better control over their mental processes. Whether it's improving productivity, closing unresolved emotional loops, or resisting psychological tricks used in marketing and persuasion. Awareness of this effect provides an advantage in navigating both personal and professional life. Guilt tripping. Guilt tripping is a psychological manipulation tactic that makes someone feel guilty or responsible for a situation in order to control their actions. It plays on human emotions, particularly the deep-seated need to be seen as a good person and avoid disappointing others. When someone guilt trips you, they frame a situation in such a way that rejecting their request or standing up for yourself feels like an act of cruelty or selfishness. Instead of asking directly for what they want, they manipulate your emotions so that you feel obligated to comply. At its core, guilt tripping exploits the natural human tendency to seek approval and avoid conflict. The guilt tripper strategically positions themselves as a victim, subtly implying that your actions, or lack of action, are hurting them. The goal is to make you feel responsible for their emotional state, even when you haven't actually done anything wrong. Once guilt takes hold, the target often feels pressured to make amends, even if it means going against their own best interests. One of the most common ways guilt tripping appears is through passive-aggressive remarks. Statements like, "I guess I'll just do it myself, even though I always help you," or, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me," are classic guilt-tripping phrases. These statements are not direct requests, but rather calculated expressions designed to provoke a sense of obligation. Instead of openly communicating their needs, guilt trippers plant emotional traps, making their target feel like they owe them something. Guilt tripping is often seen in relationships, particularly in toxic friendships, romantic dynamics, and even family interactions. A parent might say, "If you really loved me, you'd call me more often," instead of simply asking for more frequent communication. A partner might say, "If you cared about our relationship, you wouldn't go out with your friends tonight," turning a personal choice into an act of neglect. The guilt tripper seeks to control behavior by making their target feel like any act of independence is a betrayal. This manipulation tactic is also commonly used in workplaces. A boss might say, "I thought you were a team player, but if you don't want to put in extra hours, that's your choice," making an employee feel guilty for setting boundaries. Colleagues might say, "I covered for you last time, but I guess you don't return favors," guilt-tripping someone into doing extra work. Because people generally want to be seen as reliable and considerate, they often give in to such pressure, even if it means sacrificing their own needs. Guilt-tripping can be a subtle yet powerful tool in persuasion, particularly in situations where direct confrontation would be less effective. It's a favorite technique of manipulative individuals because it allows them to get their way without appearing aggressive or controlling. Instead of outright demanding something, they make their target feel as though they are the ones at fault, compelling them to act out of remorse rather than genuine willingness. One of the most dangerous aspects of guilt tripping is that it can erode a person's sense of autonomy over time. If someone is constantly made to feel guilty for prioritizing their own needs, they begin to associate self-care with selfishness. This leads to a pattern of people-pleasing, where they constantly sacrifice their well-being to avoid disappointing others. In extreme cases, prolonged exposure to guilt tripping can lead to anxiety, resentment, and emotional exhaustion. To defend against guilt tripping, it's crucial to recognize it for what it is: manipulation disguised as emotional appeal. If someone makes you feel guilty for setting a boundary or making a decision, pause and ask yourself whether their feelings are truly your responsibility. Instead of falling into the trap of apologizing or over-explaining, respond with firm but calm statements like, "I understand that you're upset, but I have to do what's best for me." Acknowledging their feelings without accepting guilt is the best way to break the cycle. The best way to handle guilt tripping is to maintain strong personal boundaries. If someone tries to make you feel responsible for their emotions, remind yourself that everyone is responsible for their own feelings. The moment you stop feeding into the guilt, the manipulator loses their power over you. While it's natural to want to help others, true support should come from a place of genuine kindness, not emotional coercion. Triangulation. Triangulation is a manipulation tactic where a person brings a third party into a conflict or interaction to gain control, create division, or increase their own influence. Instead of dealing directly with an issue, the manipulator uses a third person, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, to alter the dynamics of the situation. This technique is commonly used in toxic relationships, dysfunctional workplaces, and manipulative social settings. The core strategy behind triangulation is simple. Instead of addressing a concern or disagreement with someone directly, the manipulator involves another person to either reinforce their position, create jealousy, or shift the power balance in their favor. By introducing a third party, they make the situation more complex and emotionally charged, making it harder for their target to defend themselves or see the real source of the manipulation. One of the most common forms of triangulation occurs in romantic relationships. A manipulative partner may bring up another person, perhaps an ex, a co-worker, or even a fictional admirer, to create insecurity and competition. They might say, "You never compliment me like Sarah does," or "My ex always understood me better." This plants seeds of doubt, making the target feel as though they need to work harder to maintain the relationship. The manipulator's goal is to create emotional instability, ensuring that their partner remains anxious and eager for validation. Triangulation is also a frequent tactic in toxic workplaces. A manager might play employees against each other by saying things like, "John always stays late to finish his work. Maybe you should take your job more seriously," fostering an environment of rivalry and distrust. By keeping employees uncertain of their standing, the manipulator maintains control over the group dynamic. Similarly, gossip is often used as a form of triangulation, where a person spreads selective information to different individuals to manipulate how they perceive one another. Family dynamics are another area where triangulation can be especially damaging. A parent might play siblings against each other, favoring one child while making the other feel inadequate. They may say things like, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" creating tension between the siblings while reinforcing their own position as the authority figure. This form of triangulation can leave lasting psychological scars, as it fosters resentment and prevents healthy relationships from forming. One of the reasons triangulation is so effective is that it creates confusion and emotional instability. When people are uncertain about where they stand in a relationship, they are more susceptible to manipulation. The person at the center of the triangulation often remains in control because they dictate how information is shared and how conflicts are perceived. Instead of addressing problems directly, they manipulate emotions, causing others to react based on incomplete or distorted narratives. To counter triangulation, the key is direct communication. If someone tries to manipulate you by introducing a third party into a conflict, refuse to engage in indirect discussions. Instead, confront the person directly and insist on resolving the issue without outside interference. If someone attempts to make you feel jealous or insecure by bringing up another person, recognize it as an emotional manipulation tactic rather than a genuine reflection of your worth. Setting boundaries is essential when dealing with a manipulator who uses triangulation. Recognizing the tactic early can help prevent unnecessary emotional distress. If someone frequently tries to pit people against each other or plays mind games to maintain control, it's a sign of toxic behavior that should not be tolerated. The best way to neutralize triangulation is to remove yourself from the manipulative dynamic and engage only in open, honest, and direct communication. Triangulation is a psychological tool that thrives in environments of secrecy, insecurity, and competition. Whether it's used in relationships, workplaces, or families, it's designed to create division and exert control. Once you recognize the pattern, you regain the power to see through the manipulation and refuse to play the game. The silent treatment. The silent treatment is a psychological manipulation tactic where one person deliberately ignores or withholds communication from another as a means of control, punishment, or coercion. It is one of the most passive-aggressive forms of emotional manipulation, designed to instill anxiety, insecurity, and submission in the target. Instead of addressing an issue directly, the manipulator weaponizes silence, creating an emotional void that leaves the other person confused, desperate for resolution, and often willing to do whatever it takes to restore communication. At first glance, the silent treatment may seem like an immature or petty reaction, but in reality, it is a powerful and deliberate psychological tool. It taps into the fundamental human need for connection and validation. When someone suddenly withdraws their attention, it creates an emotional imbalance, triggering a response similar to withdrawal from an addiction. The brain perceives the lack of communication as a form of social rejection, which can activate feelings of self-doubt, guilt, and desperation. The longer the silence continues, the more the target becomes preoccupied with trying to fix the situation, often at the expense of their own self-respect. The silent treatment is commonly used in toxic relationships, whether romantic, familial, or professional. In romantic relationships, a partner may refuse to talk to the other after a disagreement, not to process their emotions, but to make the other person feel guilty and eager to appease them. This type of emotional cold shouldering can make the victim feel like they are walking on eggshells, afraid of triggering another period of silence. In family settings, parents may use the silent treatment to control their children, making them feel unworthy of attention if they don't comply with expectations. In workplaces, a manipulative boss or coworker might ignore someone to make them feel excluded, isolated, or professionally insecure. The impact of the silent treatment can be severe. Studies have shown that social rejection triggers the same brain regions as physical pain. Being ignored by someone important to us can feel like an attack on our very existence. It can lead to stress, anxiety, decreased self-esteem, and even symptoms of depression. Over time, individuals who are repeatedly subjected to the silent treatment may develop a fear of expressing themselves, choosing compliance over confrontation, simply to avoid being shut out again. The silent treatment differs from healthy silence. In healthy relationships, people may take time apart to process emotions or avoid saying something they might regret. The difference is intent. Healthy silence is about self-reflection, whereas manipulative silence is about control. The manipulator wants the target to feel abandoned, confused, or guilty enough to submit to their will. The best way to respond to the silent treatment is to recognize it as an emotional manipulation tactic rather than a reflection of your worth. If someone is deliberately ignoring you to make you feel anxious or guilty, resist the urge to chase after them for validation. Instead, set clear boundaries. If they refuse to communicate, let them know that you will not tolerate emotional withholding as a weapon. If necessary, distance yourself from the manipulator and focus on environments where open, respectful communication is valued. Understanding the silent treatment allows you to break free from its psychological grip. The moment you stop reacting to it, the manipulator loses their power. Silence is only effective as a tool of control if you give it that power. When you stop seeking their validation, their ability to manipulate you fades. The Illusory Truth Effect. The illusory truth effect is a psychological phenomenon where people start to believe false information simply because they have heard it repeatedly. It is one of the most powerful cognitive biases, shaping everything from personal beliefs to political ideologies. The more often something is repeated, the more familiar it feels. And the more familiar it feels, the more likely we are to believe it is true, even if it's completely false. This effect occurs because the brain prefers mental shortcuts over critical thinking. Instead of rigorously analyzing every piece of information, the mind relies on familiarity as a sign of credibility. When we hear something multiple times, our brain processes it with greater ease, making it seem more valid. This is why misinformation, propaganda, and advertising rely so heavily on repetition. If a statement is repeated often enough, people stop questioning its accuracy and accept it as fact. A well-documented example of the illusory truth effect is seen in media and politics. Politicians, advertisers, and influencers understand that repeating a message, no matter how misleading, makes it more likely to be believed. A political figure may repeat a false claim over and over, knowing that even skeptics may begin to subconsciously accept it as truth. Media outlets reinforce this effect by covering the same misleading narratives across multiple platforms, embedding the falsehood into the public consciousness. Over time, even well-informed individuals may start to accept incorrect information simply because it has been presented to them repeatedly. Advertising is another field where the illusory truth effect is deliberately exploited. Marketers constantly repeat slogans, jingles, and claims to make them stick in the consumer's mind. When a brand repeats the message that their product is the best, fastest, or most effective, people start to believe it, even if there's little evidence to support the claim. The sheer repetition of a statement makes it feel true, overriding logical analysis. The effect also extends to everyday social interactions. When a rumor is repeated multiple times, it gains perceived legitimacy, even if there is no factual basis. This is why gossip spreads so easily. Once enough people repeat a falsehood, it no longer feels like speculation, but rather accepted truth. Similarly, in relationships, if someone repeatedly tells you that you're incapable, unworthy, or unlovable, you may start to internalize those beliefs, even if they are baseless. One of the most dangerous aspects of the illusory truth effect is its ability to distort memory. Studies have shown that when people are exposed to repeated falsehoods, they sometimes misremember past events to align with the repeated misinformation. This means that false narratives can actually alter people's perception of reality, reinforcing biases and making it difficult to distinguish fact from fiction. To defend against the illusory truth effect, critical thinking is essential. Instead of accepting information based on how often you've heard it, actively question the source, credibility, and evidence behind the claim. If something sounds familiar, remind yourself that repetition does not equal truth. Cross-check information from multiple sources, especially when dealing with news, social media, or persuasive messaging. Being aware of this psychological trick also helps in everyday decision-making. If you feel pressured to believe something just because it has been repeated many times, pause and investigate whether it holds actual merit. By developing a habit of skepticism and seeking out factual verification, you can protect yourself from falling victim to manipulation. The illusory truth effect is one of the most insidious forms of psychological influence because it works beneath the surface of conscious awareness. It doesn't rely on logic, evidence, or reason. It exploits familiarity. Once you understand this effect, you can reclaim control over what you believe and ensure that your thoughts and decisions are based on reality, not repetition. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is one of the most insidious psychological manipulation tactics, designed to make someone question their own reality, memory, and perception. It is a form of emotional abuse where the manipulator deliberately distorts the truth, denies past events, or twists facts to make the victim doubt themselves. Over time, gaslighting erodes self-confidence, leaving the target dependent on the manipulator's version of reality. The term originates from the 1944 film Gaslight, in which a husband slowly drives his wife to question her sanity by altering her environment and denying things she knows to be true. Today, gaslighting is widely recognized as a toxic tactic used in relationships, workplaces, and even in politics. At its core, gaslighting works by creating a power imbalance. The manipulator controls the narrative, constantly shifting goalposts and making the victim feel as though they are always in the wrong. They may deny things they previously said, contradict obvious facts, or accuse the victim of being too sensitive or overreacting when they express concerns. This relentless distortion of reality creates an environment where the victim feels uncertain about their own thoughts and emotions. Gaslighting often starts subtly, making it difficult to recognize in the early stages. A partner might say, "That never happened. You must be imagining things," when confronted about something they did. A boss might insist, "I never said that deadline was next week," when they clearly did. Over time, the victim starts second-guessing themselves, feeling as if they are losing grip on reality. The more they question their own judgment, the easier it becomes for the manipulator to exert control. One of the most damaging aspects of gaslighting is how it isolates the victim. The more they doubt themselves, the less likely they are to seek support from others. The manipulator might reinforce this isolation by telling them that no one else will believe them or by portraying them as unstable or irrational. This tactic ensures that the victim remains dependent on the abuser's version of events, making it even harder to break free. Gaslighting is especially prevalent in toxic relationships, where one partner seeks to dominate the other. It can manifest in phrases like, "You're just being paranoid," "You're always making things up," or "Everyone else agrees with me. Why are you the only one who sees it differently?" These statements create doubt and insecurity, making the victim feel as though they are the problem. The same tactic is often used in workplace environments by manipulative bosses or colleagues who deny responsibility for their mistakes and shift blame onto others. In political and social contexts, gaslighting is used to control public perception. Leaders, corporations, and media outlets sometimes deny documented events, distort historical facts, or contradict their own statements, making the public question their own understanding of reality. This widespread gaslighting can create confusion, compliance, and distrust in independent thought, ultimately serving those in power. To defend against gaslighting, the first step is recognizing it. If someone constantly makes you question your own memory or perception, take note of inconsistencies in their statements. Keeping written records of conversations, saving messages, or talking to a trusted friend can help you validate your experiences. The key is to trust your instincts. If something feels off, it likely is. Setting firm boundaries with gaslighters is essential. Refuse to engage in debates about reality with someone who repeatedly distorts the truth. Instead, state your observations confidently and remove yourself from manipulative situations whenever possible. Breaking free from gaslighting requires rebuilding self-trust. The more you affirm your own experiences, the less power the gaslighter has over you. Seeking support from friends, therapists, or mentors can help counteract the effects of prolonged gaslighting. Remember, the goal of a gaslighter is to make you doubt yourself. The moment you stop questioning your own reality and start standing firm in your truth, their manipulation loses its grip. Time pressure. Time pressure is a psychological tactic used to manipulate people into making rushed decisions without giving them the time to think critically. It is one of the most common influence strategies used in sales, negotiations, and high-stakes situations where manipulators want to override logical reasoning by creating a false sense of urgency. The underlying principle is simple. When people feel they are running out of time, they panic, default to instinctive decision-making, and are more likely to comply with whatever is being pushed on them. This tactic works because of how the human brain processes stress. When faced with a time-sensitive decision, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thinking, is overridden by the limbic system, which governs emotional and instinctual responses. Under pressure, people tend to prioritize short-term relief over long-term benefits, making them vulnerable to manipulation. They don't analyze all the options carefully. They just want to escape the discomfort of making a difficult decision under duress. Time pressure is a cornerstone of aggressive sales tactics. Have you ever seen a limited time offer or a flash sale, only a few hours left? These are deliberate psychological triggers designed to make consumers buy impulsively, fearing that if they don't act immediately, they will lose out. Even if the deal isn't actually scarce, the illusion of urgency tricks people into making decisions they wouldn't otherwise make. Retailers use phrases like, "only 2 left in stock," or "this offer expires tonight," to create artificial pressure, making customers act before they have the chance to compare prices or think critically. Time pressure is also heavily used in negotiations. A salesperson, recruiter, or contract manager might say, "We need an answer by the end of the day," forcing the other party into a rushed decision. By limiting the time available to weigh options, the manipulator increases the likelihood of the target agreeing to unfavorable terms. In high-stakes business deals, one party may intentionally delay presenting critical information until the last minute, leaving the other side scrambling to decide under stress. In personal relationships, time pressure can be used to force someone into commitment before they're ready. A partner might say, "If you don't decide to move in with me by next week, I'll assume you don't care about this relationship." A friend might pressure you with, "If you really support me, you'll help me right now. There's no time to think about it." These tactics rely on the same psychological principle. The faster someone is forced to make a decision, the more likely they are to comply out of fear rather than genuine willingness. Time pressure also plays a major role in scams and fraudulent schemes. Con artists frequently use time-sensitive warnings to trick victims into acting without verifying information. Messages like, "Your account will be locked in 24 hours if you don't verify your details," or "Act now or you will miss this once-in-a-lifetime investment," prey on the fear of loss, pushing people into decisions they later regret. The best way to defend against time pressure is to recognize when it is being used against you. Anytime you feel rushed to make an important decision, pause and ask yourself whether the urgency is real or artificially created. In most cases, you actually have more time than the manipulator wants you to believe. Instead of reacting impulsively, step back and assess the situation logically. If someone tries to force you into an immediate decision, counter with, "I need time to think about this," or simply walk away until you have had a chance to analyze your options. By resisting the illusion of urgency, you take back control over your decision-making. The goal of those who use time pressure is to push you into a state of anxiety where you comply without question. But when you slow down, regain clarity, and refuse to be rushed, their power over you disappears. In a world filled with constant pressure to act fast, the ability to take your time and think critically is one of the strongest defenses against manipulation. Anchoring bias. Anchoring bias is a cognitive distortion where people rely too heavily on the first piece of information they receive when making decisions. This initial reference point, whether accurate or not, acts as a psychological anchor, influencing all subsequent judgments. Once an anchor is set, it becomes difficult to adjust away from it, leading to skewed perceptions and irrational decision-making. This bias is widely exploited in sales, negotiations, and psychological manipulation because people unconsciously compare everything to the first number, expectation, or suggestion presented to them. This phenomenon was first studied by psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, who discovered that people's decisions are disproportionately influenced by an initial number, even when that number is arbitrary. In one famous experiment, participants were asked to spin a wheel that randomly landed on a number between 0 and 100. Then, they were asked to guess the percentage of African countries in the United Nations. Those who landed on a higher number on the wheel guessed significantly higher percentages than those who landed on a lower number, proving that the initial number influenced their judgment, even though it had no actual relevance. One of the most common ways anchoring bias is used in manipulation is in pricing strategies. Retailers frequently display an exaggerated original price next to a discounted price, making the new price seem like an incredible deal. A jacket that is marked down from $200 to $79 seems like an amazing bargain until you realize that the store never intended to sell it for $200 in the first place. The initial high price was just an anchor planted in your mind so that the lower price seems irresistible in comparison. Real estate agents use this tactic as well. A seller might list a house at an artificially high price, knowing that any lower counteroffer will still be anchored to that inflated number. Even if a buyer negotiates down, they will still pay more than they otherwise would have if the anchor had been set lower. Similarly, in job salary negotiations, a company might initially offer a much lower salary than what they are actually willing to pay. The prospective employee, anchored to that low number, may feel like they are negotiating a better deal when they get a slight increase, when in reality, they are still earning less than they could have. The anchoring bias is also widely exploited in legal situations, politics, and social influence. Lawyers use high monetary demands in lawsuits so that the final settlement still feels substantial, even when reduced. Political debates are often shaped by the first number or statistic presented, regardless of its accuracy. In everyday life, when someone makes a wildly exaggerated claim, even if you reject it, your next thought is still anchored to it, subtly influencing your judgment. One of the darker aspects of anchoring bias is its ability to warp self-perception and expectations. If someone repeatedly tells you that you are not good enough, that negative anchor can stick in your subconscious, affecting how you view yourself. Conversely, those who inflate their accomplishments early in a relationship or career can establish a high-status anchor, making people perceive them as more competent or successful than they actually are. The best way to combat anchoring bias is to consciously challenge the first piece of information presented to you. Before making a decision, ask yourself, is this number or fact an artificial anchor? Seek out independent data and reframe the situation without the influence of the initial anchor. In negotiations, make sure you are the one setting the first number. This way, you control the reference point that others will be anchored to. When dealing with prices, salaries, or investments, do your own research rather than relying on the numbers presented to you. Understanding how anchoring bias shapes decisions allows you to resist psychological traps and make more rational choices. Instead of blindly accepting the first number or idea you encounter, train yourself to look beyond the anchor and evaluate the situation objectively. When you break free from artificial reference points, you regain control over your own judgment. False scarcity. False scarcity is a psychological manipulation tactic that creates the illusion that a product, opportunity, or resource is rare or in limited supply to pressure people into making rushed decisions. This technique exploits the fear of missing out, FOMO, triggering impulsive behavior and emotional decision-making. When people believe that something is scarce, they value it more, even when the scarcity is completely artificial. Scarcity is a powerful motivator because it taps into the primal survival instinct. In prehistoric times, when food and resources were genuinely scarce, acting quickly ensured survival. This instinct still exists in the modern brain, which is why marketers, salespeople, and manipulators weaponize it to create urgency and drive action. Retailers frequently use false scarcity in sales strategies. A website might show a message like, "Only 2 left in stock," or "This offer expires in 24 hours," even though there is actually plenty of stock and the sale will reset the next day. Airlines and hotel booking sites display phrases like, "Only 1 room left at this price," to make travelers feel pressured to book immediately, even though similar rooms will be available later. The entire concept of limited time offers is often a fabricated marketing ploy designed to bypass logical thinking and push people into hasty purchases. Luxury brands and exclusive clubs also rely on false scarcity to maintain high demand. Many high-end brands artificially limit the number of items they produce, not because they can't make more, but because scarcity creates desirability. People perceive rare items as more valuable, leading them to pay significantly more than they otherwise would. Similarly, some businesses create long wait lists or invitation-only memberships to increase perceived exclusivity, making customers feel privileged to be chosen. False scarcity is commonly used in social and professional settings as well. A manipulative employer might say, "We have many candidates eager for this position, so we need an answer now," pushing the applicant to accept a lower salary out of fear that the opportunity will disappear. In relationships, someone might create the illusion of being highly sought after, constantly mentioning other potential suitors, or implying that they have limited time, so that their partner feels insecure and more eager to lock them down. The effectiveness of false scarcity comes from its ability to create panic. When people feel that they must act immediately, they stop considering their options rationally. They don't pause to ask, "Is this actually rare?" or "Do I really need this right now?" Instead, they react emotionally, driven by the fear of regret. One of the most damaging aspects of false scarcity is how it leads people to compromise on quality, price, and personal values. Someone who believes that a job offer is their only chance may accept poor working conditions. A person who thinks a romantic partner is their last opportunity for love may tolerate toxic behavior. A consumer who is convinced that a deal will never come again might spend money they can't afford, only to realize later that similar opportunities were always available. To defend against false scarcity, always take a step back before making a decision. Ask yourself, is this truly a rare opportunity, or is it being made to seem that way? If someone is pressuring you into an immediate decision, that's a red flag. Legitimate opportunities, whether in business, relationships, or purchases, allow time for rational consideration. Avoid impulse decisions by waiting. If a product is about to sell out, check back later and see if the scarcity claim was real. If a job offer is urgent, ask yourself if accepting immediately benefits you or just the employer. If someone in your life constantly creates the feeling that you must act fast to keep them, recognize that as an emotional control tactic. The moment you stop reacting to artificial urgency, you take back your power. False scarcity only works on those who believe it. When you start making choices based on logic rather than fear, you stop falling into psychological traps designed to manipulate your actions. Real opportunities don't need tricks. They speak for themselves. Framing manipulation. Framing manipulation is a psychological technique where information is presented in a way that influences perception, decision-making, and emotional response. The way something is framed determines whether it is seen as positive or negative, beneficial or harmful, urgent or insignificant. By carefully choosing words, context, and emphasis, manipulators can guide others towards specific conclusions without outright lying. The power of framing lies in the fact that human cognition is not purely logical. Our brains process information based on associations, context, and emotional triggers rather than objective facts alone. Framing can make the same situation appear completely different depending on how it is presented. Imagine a politician describing a policy as protecting jobs rather than restricting international trade. The wording shifts the emotional response, even though both statements may describe the same action. In marketing, a product labeled as 95% fat-free sounds far more appealing than contains 5% fat, even though they mean the same thing. The human brain is wired to interpret language emotionally, so even small changes in wording can shape perception and decision-making. One of the most common uses of framing manipulation occurs in sales and advertising. A car dealership might describe a used car as certified pre-owned instead of used, making it sound more valuable. Food companies use labels like natural or organic, even when those terms have no regulatory meaning, because they create a positive frame. In financial transactions, stores advertise, "You save $30," rather than "You spend $70," highlighting the gain rather than the loss. These subtle shifts in presentation play on psychological biases, leading consumers to make decisions they might not have otherwise. Framing is also a key tool in media and politics. News outlets can frame the same event in completely different ways to shape public perception. A protest can be described as a powerful movement for justice or as a disruptive riot. The framing determines whether the audience views it as righteous or chaotic. Politicians use framing to control narratives. They might call a tax increase an investment in the future instead of higher costs for citizens. By carefully controlling how information is introduced, they manipulate emotions and opinions without changing the actual facts. Manipulative individuals use framing manipulation in relationships and personal interactions as well. A toxic partner might say, "You never spend time with me anymore," instead of, "I miss spending time with you," framing the issue as neglect rather than affection. A controlling boss might say, "We need dedicated employees who prioritize the company," rather than acknowledging that they are demanding unpaid overtime. By framing their demands as positive values rather than unfair expectations, they make resistance seem unreasonable. The darker side of framing manipulation is that it can be used to justify unethical behavior. Governments use military terms like collateral damage instead of civilian casualties to downplay violence. Companies rebrand layoffs as strategic restructuring to avoid backlash. Abusive individuals might say, "I'm only tough on you because I care," reframing their cruelty as concern. These tactics distort reality, making it harder for people to recognize manipulation and resist it. The best defense against framing manipulation is critical thinking. Whenever information is presented in an emotionally charged way, ask yourself, is this the full picture or just one perspective? Look for alternative frames. How would the situation sound if phrased differently? Compare different sources, especially when dealing with news, politics, or sales tactics. If someone presents a choice as your only option, challenge that assumption and consider alternatives. Understanding framing. Manipulation allows you to see through surface-level persuasion and analyze the true meaning behind words. When you recognize how framing is being used, you can take back control over your own thoughts and decisions, ensuring that you are making choices based on reality, not rhetorical tricks. Social proof exploitation. Social proof exploitation is a psychological manipulation technique where people are influenced to conform to a behavior, belief, or decision simply because they see others doing the same. Social proof is the natural human tendency to look to others for guidance in uncertain situations. When used ethically, it helps people make informed decisions. When exploited, it is used to manipulate emotions, override critical thinking, and pressure individuals into compliance. The foundation of social proof lies in evolutionary psychology. In early human societies, survival depended on group behavior. If a large number of people ran in one direction, it was safer to follow them than to stop and question why. This instinct still exists today. When we see a long line outside a restaurant, we assume the food must be good. If a product has thousands of positive reviews, we believe it must be worth buying. If everyone in a social setting seems to agree with an opinion, we feel pressure to conform, even if we privately disagree. Social proof is one of the most exploited tactics in sales and marketing. Companies flood their websites with fake testimonials, exaggerated customer reviews, and artificial popularity indicators, over 1 million satisfied customers, to create the illusion that their product is widely loved. Influencers are paid to promote brands, making it seem as though their endorsements are genuine rather than financially motivated. Businesses also use tactics like bestseller tags, countdown timers, and trending now labels to create a false sense of urgency, making people buy based on perceived popularity rather than personal need. This technique is especially powerful in high-pressure sales environments. A real estate agent might say, "This house has had multiple offers today. You should act fast, even if no offers exist." A car dealership might tell a hesitant buyer, "Most people who test drive this car buy it on the spot," creating the fear of missing out. These tactics exploit the human desire to fit in, making people feel that rejecting the offer would mean going against the crowd. Social proof is also a major tool in politics, media, and social movements. When the same narrative is repeated across multiple platforms, people assume it must be true because everyone is saying it. This is why propaganda campaigns use repetition, celebrity endorsements, and mass rallies to create the illusion of consensus, making dissent feel socially unacceptable. Manipulative leaders surround themselves with cheering supporters, making it seem like their ideas are universally popular, even if a large portion of the population disagrees. In personal relationships, social proof exploitation appears in the form of peer pressure and groupthink. A toxic partner might say, "Everyone thinks you're overreacting," to invalidate feelings and enforce compliance. In workplaces, an unethical practice might be justified with, "This is just how we do things here," making employees hesitant to challenge misconduct. Even in everyday social interactions, people often feel pressure to go along with questionable behavior simply because no one else seems to have a problem with it. The danger of social proof exploitation is that it bypasses independent thought. When people assume that something is right just because it is popular, they stop questioning its validity. This is how misinformation spreads, scams gain traction, and harmful social norms persist. People are less likely to challenge authority, resist peer pressure, or make decisions based on personal values when they are bombarded with the illusion that everyone else is on board. To protect yourself from social proof exploitation, practice conscious skepticism. Whenever you feel pressured to conform because everyone is doing it, stop and ask, is this actually the best choice or just the most popular one? Look for real evidence instead of relying on crowd behavior. Just because something is widely accepted doesn't mean it is true, ethical, or beneficial. The ability to resist social proof exploitation is a mark of independent thinking. When you understand that popularity does not equal truth, you free yourself from the need to follow the crowd. Whether it's a purchase, an idea, or a belief system, Making decisions based on reason rather than social pressure puts you in control of your own mind. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a psychological phenomenon that occurs when a person holds two conflicting beliefs, attitudes, or values at the same time, creating a deep sense of internal discomfort. The human brain craves consistency, so when contradictions arise, it struggles to resolve them, often by altering beliefs, justifying irrational behavior, or rejecting inconvenient facts. This effect is one of the most powerful drivers of human decision-making, and when exploited, it can be used to manipulate people into changing their opinions, reinforcing destructive behaviors, or even accepting false narratives. At its core, cognitive dissonance arises when actions and beliefs don't align. For example, if someone sees themselves as an honest person but is caught lying, they experience a psychological conflict. To reduce the discomfort, they might justify the lie. It wasn't a big deal. Shift blame. They made me do it. Or even change their belief. Sometimes lying is necessary. Instead of admitting fault, the brain seeks an explanation that restores harmony between thoughts and actions. This phenomenon is widely exploited in marketing, politics, and social influence. Advertisers use cognitive dissonance to make consumers uncomfortable with their current choices, pushing them toward a desired behavior. A luxury brand might imply, if you truly value success, you should be driving this car. If a person sees themselves as successful but doesn't own the car, they feel a contradiction. To resolve it, they either dismiss the brand's claim, or more commonly, they buy the car to align with their self-image. Cognitive dissonance is also a favorite tool in cults, toxic relationships, and manipulation tactics. A cult leader might preach love and acceptance, but enforce extreme obedience. When followers notice this contradiction, instead of questioning the leader, they often justify the rules. This must be for a greater purpose. Or blame themselves. I must not be devoted enough. Similarly, an abusive partner might claim to love their victim while treating them cruelly. The victim, rather than accepting that love and abuse cannot coexist, may justify the abuse. They do this because they care, reinforcing the toxic cycle. One of the darkest applications of cognitive dissonance is in political and ideological manipulation. When people invest in a belief system, they resist evidence that contradicts it, because admitting they were wrong would cause too much internal conflict. This is why people double down on misinformation, defend corrupt leaders, or justify unethical actions that align with their group identity. Rather than changing their beliefs in response to new evidence, they reject or reinterpret the evidence to maintain psychological comfort. The power of cognitive dissonance is that it locks people into their existing decisions and makes them resistant to change. Once someone has invested in an idea, a relationship, or a decision, their brain works overtime to defend it, even against logic. This is why people continue bad habits, stay in toxic situations, and cling to outdated beliefs long after they stop serving them. The fear of admitting error is often stronger than the desire for truth. To protect yourself from cognitive dissonance manipulation, regularly challenge your own assumptions. When you feel discomfort or defensiveness in response to new information, ask yourself, am I resisting this because it's false or because it contradicts what I want to believe? Recognizing dissonance is the first step to breaking free from its hold. Learning to sit with discomfort rather than automatically justifying past choices allows for true intellectual and emotional growth. Understanding cognitive dissonance gives you the power to see through manipulation, escape self-deception, and make decisions based on truth rather than psychological comfort. Once you learn to navigate the tension between conflicting thoughts, you become less susceptible to external influence and more capable of thinking independently. Repetition, hypnosis. Repetition hypnosis is a psychological technique where information, phrases, or behaviors are repeated so often that they bypass critical thinking and become deeply ingrained in the subconscious mind. This tactic is widely used in advertising, propaganda, social conditioning, and personal manipulation to influence beliefs and behaviors without the target realizing they are being programmed. The human brain naturally seeks patterns, and when exposed to the same message repeatedly, it begins to accept it as truth, regardless of whether it is logically sound. This technique works because repetition strengthens neural pathways in the brain. The more a statement is heard, the easier it becomes to recall, and the more familiar it feels. The brain often confuses familiarity with truth, which is why repeated falsehoods can eventually feel as convincing as factual information. The phrase, "a lie told often enough becomes the truth," is not just a saying, it is a fundamental principle of human psychology. Repetition. Hypnosis is the foundation of advertising. Companies repeat slogans, jingles, and brand messages to embed them into consumers' subconscious minds. If you've ever found yourself humming a commercial tune or automatically associating a brand with a certain emotion, you have experienced the effects of this technique. The more frequently an idea is repeated, the more naturally it comes to mind, making people more likely to believe it and act on it. In politics, repetition is used to shape public opinion and control narratives. Political leaders and media outlets repeat the same phrases over and over. "We are under attack," "this policy is working," "the other side is corrupt," because they know that constant exposure makes the message feel true. This is why propaganda campaigns rely on repetition, not because the message itself is convincing, but because hearing something repeatedly makes it difficult to ignore. Religious and ideological groups also use repetition to reinforce beliefs. Chants, prayers, and affirmations repeated daily strengthen conviction and suppress doubt. The same principle applies in extremist groups and cults, where members are exposed to the same doctrines over and over, making it harder to question or break free from the belief system. By repeating certain ideas constantly, leaders create an environment where alternative perspectives feel unnatural, even if they are more logical or factual. On a personal level, repetition hypnosis is used in abusive relationships and social manipulation. A toxic person may repeatedly tell their partner, "You're worthless without me," or "No one else will ever love you," until the victim begins to internalize those messages. The same technique is used in bullying, where repeated insults or labels begin to shape the victim's self-identity. Over time, repetition turns a manipulator's words into the victim's own inner dialogue, trapping them in a cycle of self-doubt and dependence. Repetition hypnosis also appears in modern digital environments. The constant repetition of ideas on social media, whether through viral trends, echo chambers, or coordinated misinformation, reinforces collective beliefs. Algorithms push the same narratives repeatedly, making people feel as though certain viewpoints are universally accepted, even when they are actually manufactured or biased. The more someone is exposed to an idea online, the more natural it feels, and the harder it becomes to critically evaluate it. To defend against repetition hypnosis, be mindful of the messages you are exposed to regularly. Ask yourself, do I believe this because it's true, or just because I've heard it 1,000 times? Challenge repetitive statements by seeking out alternative perspectives and questioning their validity. Diversify your information sources to avoid being trapped in echo chambers. When someone repeats something excessively, recognize that they may be trying to program your thinking rather than present objective reality. The power of repetition hypnosis lies in its ability to influence without direct coercion. When someone hears an idea enough times, they begin to repeat it themselves, believing it to be their own thought. By becoming aware of this tactic, you can break free from subconscious programming, think more critically, and make decisions based on evidence rather than psychological conditioning. True independence of thought comes from questioning not only what you hear, but how often you hear it and why. Priming. Priming is a psychological technique where exposure to certain stimuli influences a person's thoughts, behaviors, or decisions without them realizing it. This tactic works by subtly planting an idea in the subconscious mind, making the individual more likely to act in a specific way when triggered. Priming is used in everything from marketing and politics to everyday conversations and psychological manipulation. By controlling what someone sees, hears, or experiences before making a decision, a manipulator can shape their response without them ever realizing they've been influenced. The human brain is highly associative. It connects words, images, and experiences together in complex neural networks. When a concept is introduced, even in a subtle way, the brain starts activating related thoughts and associations. For example, if a person sees the word yellow and is later asked to name a fruit, they are more likely to say banana than apple because their mind has already been primed to think in a certain direction. This process happens automatically and can be used to guide people toward specific decisions. Priming is one of the most common manipulation tools in advertising and consumer psychology. Businesses use it to influence buying behavior by exposing customers to certain cues before they make a purchase. A high-end clothing store may play classical music to prime customers into associating the products with luxury. A fast food restaurant may use bright red and yellow colors because they subconsciously stimulate hunger and urgency. Supermarkets strategically place expensive items at eye level while using scent diffusers to create a sense of comfort and familiarity, priming customers to spend more. This technique is also a fundamental tool in political and ideological influence. News media often use word choices that prime audiences to view issues in a particular way. A politician described as a strong leader primes the audience to see them as authoritative, while another described as controversial is immediately framed in a negative light. Social movements use symbolic imagery, slogans, and repeated phrases to prime people into identifying with a cause before they even fully understand its details. On a personal level, priming is frequently used in relationships and social interactions. A manipulative person may plant certain ideas in your mind before a discussion to guide the way you react. For example, before asking for a favor, they might say, "You've always been such a generous person," priming you to act in line with that identity. If someone repeatedly mentions how difficult another person is, they are priming you to see that person negatively before you've had a chance to form your own opinion. Priming also plays a role in self-perception. Studies have shown that people who are repeatedly exposed to words related to intelligence, smart, logical, analytical, perform better on cognitive tests than those who are exposed to neutral words. Conversely, negative priming can reinforce destructive behaviors. If someone is constantly told they are lazy or not good enough, their subconscious mind absorbs that message, making them more likely to behave in ways that reinforce the label. To protect yourself from priming, be aware of the subtle cues that shape your perceptions. Ask yourself, why am I thinking this way? Has something influenced me before I made this decision? Recognizing when you have been exposed to certain words, ideas, or images before forming an opinion can help you separate genuine beliefs from externally implanted ones. Being mindful of priming allows you to take back control over your thoughts, ensuring that your decisions are based on conscious choice rather than subconscious influence. Overloading with information. Overloading with information is a psychological manipulation technique where a person is bombarded with excessive amounts of data, making it difficult to think critically or make rational decisions. By overwhelming the target with too many facts, choices, or distractions, the manipulator ensures that they become confused exhausted, or mentally paralyzed, making them more likely to comply with whatever suggestion is given. This tactic is commonly used in deception, propaganda, business, and even personal relationships to gain control over a situation. The human brain has a limited capacity for processing information. When too much data is presented at once, cognitive overload occurs, leading to decision fatigue and reduced analytical ability. Instead of evaluating details carefully, the overwhelmed mind defaults to shortcuts, such as relying on authority figures, emotional reactions, or simply choosing the most obvious option. This is exactly what manipulators want, as it allows them to steer decisions in their favor while making the victim feel as though they arrived at the conclusion themselves. This tactic is widely used in corporate and legal settings. Complex contracts are deliberately written with dense, technical jargon, making it nearly impossible for the average person to understand all the terms. Faced with overwhelming legal language, people often just sign the contract without fully grasping the consequences. Banks, insurance companies, and tech firms frequently use this technique in their terms and conditions agreements, knowing that most consumers will skim over the text and accept the terms without question. Overloading with information is also a favorite strategy in political propaganda and media influence. News channels, social media, and government agencies sometimes flood the public with excessive information, not to educate, but to confuse. When people are bombarded with conflicting reports, rapidly changing narratives, and an endless stream of headlines, they become mentally fatigued and disengaged. This leads to apathy, where people either stop questioning information altogether or blindly accept the most repeated or emotionally charged version of events. Sales and marketing professionals use this tactic to manipulate buying decisions. A car salesman might present a buyer with dozens of different financing plans, extra features, and complicated pricing breakdowns, making the decision so overwhelming that the buyer simply agrees to whatever seems easiest. Websites do the same by using excessive options and unnecessary pop-ups to overwhelm users into making impulsive purchases rather than carefully considering their choices. In relationships and social manipulation, overloading with information can be used to confuse or gaslight someone. A manipulative partner may throw multiple accusations at once, making it impossible for the other person to respond to all of them logically. A controlling boss may bombard an employee with endless tasks, preventing them from focusing on what is truly important. A narcissist might change the subject repeatedly during an argument, flooding the conversation with unrelated information so that the other person loses track of the original issue. The end goal of this tactic is always the same: to exhaust the target's mental energy so that they are easier to control. The more confused and overwhelmed a person feels, the more likely they are to accept the manipulator's guidance without resistance. This is why cults, scam artists, and authoritarian regimes frequently use information overload as a weapon. It keeps people too distracted and exhausted to fight back. To defend against information overload, simplify the decision-making process. When faced with an overwhelming amount of data, break it down into smaller, manageable sections. If someone is flooding you with excessive details, ask yourself, what is the core issue here? Focus on the most important elements rather than getting lost in unnecessary complexity. In business and legal matters, take the time to read contracts carefully and ask for clarifications. If a situation feels deliberately confusing, it may be a sign that someone is trying to manipulate you. Another effective strategy is to slow down. Manipulators use urgency alongside information overload to force quick, irrational decisions. If you feel pressured to make a choice while being bombarded with data, step back and take your time to process it properly. Seeking a second opinion can also help filter out distractions and clarify what truly matters. Overloading with information is a powerful weapon because it disguises manipulation as education. It makes people feel like they are making informed decisions when, in reality, they are being steered toward a predetermined outcome. Recognizing this tactic allows you to regain control over your choices, ensuring that your decisions are based on clarity and understanding rather than confusion and exhaustion. Ben Franklin Effect. The Ben Franklin Effect is a psychological phenomenon where a person who has done you a small favor is more likely to do another favor for you in the future. This effect occurs because, after helping you once, their brain subconsciously aligns their actions with their beliefs, leading them to conclude that they must like you. Instead of assuming they did a favor out of obligation, their mind rationalizes it as proof that they have positive feelings toward you. This psychological trick was named after Benjamin Franklin, who famously used it to win over a political rival. Instead of trying to flatter or argue with the man, Franklin asked to borrow a rare book from his personal collection. His rival, wanting to appear generous, agreed. After returning the book with a kind note of gratitude, Franklin noticed a significant shift in their relationship. The once hostile rival became friendlier, engaging in discussions and eventually forming a long-term alliance. Franklin had discovered that getting someone to invest in you, even in a small way, triggers a mental shift that makes them more inclined to continue supporting you. The reason this effect works lies in cognitive dissonance. When someone does something kind for another person, they must reconcile their behavior with their existing beliefs. If they previously disliked you, but they voluntarily helped you, their brain experiences a conflict. Instead of admitting that their actions contradict their past feelings, they unconsciously adjust their attitude to match their behavior, convincing themselves that they must actually like you. This psychological phenomenon is widely used in persuasion, leadership, and social influence. Skilled negotiators often ask for small, non-threatening favors first, knowing that each favor builds a psychological bond that makes future requests more likely to be granted. Political figures, influencers, and business leaders use the same strategy, getting people to support them in small ways first, knowing that this increases long-term loyalty. Marketers also leverage the Ben Franklin effect to build customer relationships. Free samples, trial offers, and small engagement requests, such as asking a customer to answer a quick survey, create a cycle where the consumer feels increasingly invested in the brand. Once someone has given their time, energy, or resources, even in minor amounts, they are more likely to continue engaging because their brain has already started forming a positive association. In personal relationships, the Ben Franklin effect can be used to repair damaged connections or build new bonds. Instead of trying to impress someone with grand gestures, ask for a small favor. It could be as simple as borrowing a pen, requesting advice, or asking for assistance with a minor task. This small act of investment can subtly shift their perception, making them feel more positively toward you without them realizing why. However, this effect can also be exploited for manipulation. Toxic individuals or scammers may use this trick to create artificial bonds, slowly increasing their demands over time. A manipulative person might start with small requests, knowing that as someone helps them repeatedly, they will feel obligated to continue, even when the favors escalate. This technique is often used in financial scams, workplace exploitation, and toxic relationships, where one person gradually increases their level of control over another. To protect yourself from being manipulated through the Ben Franklin effect, be mindful of the pattern. If someone repeatedly asks for small favors and then increases their demands, take a step back and evaluate whether this relationship is genuine or if you are being subtly conditioned to comply. By understanding this effect, you can use it positively in your own life while also guarding against those who might use it against you. The Pygmalion Effect. The Pygmalion Effect is a psychological principle that demonstrates how high expectations can lead to improved performance. When people believe they are capable of success, and when others expect great things from them, they tend to rise to those expectations. The name comes from the Greek myth of Pygmalion, a sculptor who fell in love with a statue he created, which was later brought to life. The myth symbolizes the power of belief in shaping reality. Just as Pygmalion's faith in his creation gave it life, people who are treated as capable and successful often become exactly that. The Pygmalion Effect was first studied in educational psychology. In a famous experiment by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson, teachers were told that certain students had been identified as intellectual bloomers who were expected to show significant academic improvement. In reality, these students were randomly selected. However, by the end of the study, the students labeled as high potential actually outperformed their peers. The reason? The teachers, believing these students were special, unknowingly gave them more attention, encouragement, and challenges, leading to real improvements in their abilities. This effect applies to almost every area of life, from education and business to personal relationships and self-improvement. When a manager believes an employee is highly competent, they tend to give them more meaningful tasks, leadership opportunities, and constructive feedback, resulting in higher performance. When a coach treats an athlete as a future champion, that athlete is more likely to train harder, push their limits, and achieve greater success. Parents who show unwavering faith in their child's abilities often raise more confident and capable individuals. The Pygmalion Effect is so powerful that it can shape entire social systems. Societal expectations influence people's achievements. When certain groups are labeled as high achievers, they often fulfill that expectation, while others who are given lower expectations tend to underperform. This is why representation and encouragement matter in leadership, education, and career growth. When people are treated as if they are destined for success, they often find ways to make it a reality. However, the flip side of the Pygmalion Effect is the Golem Effect, where low expectations lead to poor performance. If a teacher assumes a student is not very bright, they may unconsciously give them less attention, patience, or encouragement, causing the student to struggle. If a boss believes an employee is incapable, they may overlook them for promotions or high-impact projects, leading to stagnation. This self-fulfilling prophecy can trap people in cycles of mediocrity, simply because of how others perceive them. The Pygmalion Effect also has significant implications in relationships. If you treat someone as intelligent, capable, and valuable, they are more likely to embody those traits. Conversely, if you constantly criticize or doubt someone, they may start internalizing those beliefs, leading to self-doubt and underperformance. The way you see others and the way you express those perceptions can literally shape their behavior and self-image. This psychological principle is often used in personal development and leadership training. Motivational speakers, coaches, and mentors encourage people to set high expectations for themselves because those expectations drive success. Positive self-talk and visualization exercises work because they reinforce the belief that you are capable of achieving great things, triggering the Pygmalion Effect within yourself. However, like any psychological principle, the Pygmalion Effect can be manipulated. Some leaders or organizations use exaggerated praise and high expectations not to inspire growth, but to extract more effort while offering little in return. Employers might tell workers, "We believe in you, your leadership material," as a way to make them work harder without ever actually promoting them. In toxic relationships, a manipulative person might say, "You have so much potential. If only you tried harder. using false praise to guilt their partner into constantly proving themselves. To use the Pygmalion effect positively, set high expectations for yourself and those around you, while backing them up with support and encouragement. Be mindful of how your words and attitudes influence others, and ensure that your expectations are realistic and constructive. Likewise, be aware of situations where others are using this effect to manipulate or exploit you. When applied with genuine belief and integrity, the Pygmalion effect can be a powerful tool for motivation, transformation, and long-term success. Negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is a psychological manipulation technique that involves removing an unpleasant stimulus to encourage a particular behavior. Unlike punishment, which adds something negative to discourage an action, negative reinforcement takes away something unpleasant to strengthen a behavior. While this technique can be used positively in habit formation and motivation, it is often exploited in manipulative relationships, workplaces, and social control tactics. The brain is wired to seek comfort and avoid discomfort. When an unpleasant situation is removed as a result of a specific action, the brain associates that action with relief, making it more likely to be repeated in the future. This is why negative reinforcement is highly effective in shaping behavior. People will go to great lengths to avoid discomfort, even if it means complying with demands that go against their best interests. A classic example of negative reinforcement occurs in parenting. A child who throws a tantrum in a store may get what they want because their parents want to stop the embarrassment. The child learns that by acting out, they can remove an unpleasant situation, parental refusal, reinforcing the behavior. The next time they want something, they are even more likely to throw a tantrum. The same principle applies in toxic relationships. If a partner gives the silent treatment until they get their way, and the other person eventually gives in to restore peace, the cycle of manipulation continues. Negative reinforcement is heavily used in workplace environments. A boss may overload employees with excessive tasks and deadlines, but when an employee works overtime or sacrifices their personal life, the pressure temporarily lifts. This conditions employees to believe that overworking is the only way to avoid stress. Similarly, a manipulative colleague may guilt-trip someone until they agree to take on extra work, then ease off once they comply. Over time, the victim internalizes the idea that saying no leads to discomfort, making them more submissive. Marketing and sales industries also exploit negative reinforcement. Many subscription-based services use this technique by making cancellation processes frustrating or complicated. Customers might try to cancel a subscription, but face endless obstacles, long wait times, additional fees, or difficult-to-find options. Eventually, the hassle of canceling becomes so unpleasant that the customer just continues paying. In another example, alarmist advertising tactics create fear. Your skin is aging faster than you think. Then offer a product to relieve that fear, reinforcing the consumer's reliance on the brand. In politics and social control, negative reinforcement is a tool for maintaining compliance. Governments and institutions may impose restrictive policies, but temporarily lift them when people behave as desired. For example, a strict curfew might be enforced, but when citizens comply, it is slightly relaxed, creating the illusion of progress while reinforcing obedience. Similarly, social groups or religious organizations may use guilt and exclusion as a form of negative reinforcement, removing social isolation only when the individual conforms to expectations. The long-term consequence of negative reinforcement is psychological conditioning. When people learn that discomfort disappears only when they comply, they stop questioning the system. They develop an automatic response to avoid confrontation, stress, or fear, even if the demands placed on them are unreasonable. This is how many people end up trapped in abusive relationships, exploitative jobs, or oppressive social structures, because they have been conditioned to believe that compliance is the only way to avoid suffering. To break free from negative reinforcement, recognize when you are being manipulated into doing something just to escape discomfort. Ask yourself, am I doing this because I truly want to, or because I'm afraid of the consequences if I don't? Setting boundaries and enduring short-term discomfort is often necessary to break the cycle. Manipulators rely on the fear of temporary pain, but once you stop reacting automatically, you regain control over your choices. False flattery. False flattery is a psychological manipulation technique where excessive or insincere praise is used to influence, deceive, or control someone. Unlike genuine compliments, which are meant to uplift and encourage, false flattery is a strategic tool designed to lower defenses, create dependency, or extract something in return. Because people naturally enjoy being praised, they often fail to recognize when it is being used against them. The power of false flattery lies in its ability to manipulate emotions. Compliments trigger a release of dopamine, the brain's feel-good chemical, making the recipient more receptive to the person giving the praise. When someone flatters you, your guard drops and you become more willing to trust them, follow their suggestions, or reciprocate their kindness. This is why skilled manipulators use flattery as a tool for persuasion, social control, and deception. One of the most common places false flattery appears is in sales and business. A car salesman might say, "You look like someone who knows a good deal when they see one," subtly making the customer feel smart and confident in their purchase. A high-end retailer might tell a shopper, "This dress looks incredible on you. You have such great taste," to encourage them to buy more. Even in job interviews, hiring managers sometimes use flattery to lower an applicant's negotiation power. "You have such impressive experience. We'd love to have you on board," making them more likely to accept a lower salary out of gratitude. False flattery is also a staple in toxic relationships. A manipulative partner may shower their significant other with compliments in the early stages of dating. "I've never met anyone like you, you're perfect," creating an illusion of deep admiration. This is often part of a larger pattern called love bombing, where excessive praise is used to establish control. Once the victim is emotionally invested, the manipulator starts withdrawing the praise, making the victim work harder to regain it, creating a cycle of emotional dependency. This technique is also heavily used in social and political settings. Public figures and leaders often flatter their audiences to gain loyalty and support. A politician might say, "The people of this country are the smartest and most hard-working citizens in the world," playing to the crowd's ego to secure votes. Similarly, corporate leaders flatter employees with phrases like, "We're a family here, and we value each and every one of you," while simultaneously exploiting their labor. By making people feel valued, they distract them from questioning unfair treatment. Another form of false flattery appears in manipulative friendships and workplace environments. A colleague might exaggerate someone's skills. "You're so much better at handling difficult clients than I am," as a way to offload their own responsibilities. A friend might say, "You're always so generous. I know I can count on you to cover this bill," using praise to pressure someone into financial favors. In these cases, the flattery is not genuine. It's a calculated move to get the other person to agree to something they might otherwise refuse. One of the reasons false flattery is so effective is that people rarely question compliments. When someone praises us, our first instinct is to accept it at face value rather than analyze the motives behind it. However, flattery is often most dangerous when it comes from someone who stands to gain something from our trust. To protect yourself from false flattery, pay attention to patterns. Ask yourself, is this person always flattering me right before asking for something? Genuine compliments are specific and balanced, while false flattery tends to be excessive, vague, or exaggerated. Also, consider whether the praise aligns with reality. If someone is constantly telling you how amazing you are while taking advantage of you, their words may be nothing more than a tool for control. Understanding false flattery helps you separate genuine appreciation from manipulation. While there is nothing wrong with receiving or giving compliments, being aware of the difference ensures that your decisions are based on reality, not empty words. The strongest defense against false flattery is knowing your own worth. When you don't need external validation, flattery loses its power over you. The contrast principle. The contrast principle is a psychological manipulation technique that influences perception by presenting two different options in succession, making one seem significantly better or worse in comparison. Instead of evaluating something on its own merits, the human brain judges it relative to what came before or after it. This principle is widely used in marketing, sales, negotiations, and even personal relationships to alter decision-making and influence emotions. The brain is naturally wired to compare things rather than assess them in absolute terms. If you place one hand in hot water and the other in cold water, then put both hands into lukewarm water, the hand that was in hot water will perceive it as cool, while the hand that was in cold water will perceive it as warm. This same principle applies to how we evaluate prices, opportunities, people, and even emotions. Sales and marketing industries rely heavily on the contrast principle. A real estate agent might first show a client a rundown, overpriced house before presenting the actual home they want to sell. Because the first house set a negative frame, the second one appears much more desirable, even if it isn't objectively great. Car dealerships use the same trick, showing a high-priced vehicle first, so that a slightly less expensive one seems like a bargain in comparison. Retailers often use the contrast principle to make discounts seem more significant. A jacket labeled as originally $300, now only $120, feels like an amazing deal, even if the store never intended to sell it for $300 in the first place. The brain focuses on the comparison rather than evaluating whether $120 is actually a fair price for the product. Similarly, luxury brands intentionally overprice their high-end items to make their mid-tier options seem more reasonable, guiding consumers towards spending more than they otherwise would. Negotiators and salespeople exploit this principle in pricing discussions. If someone wants to sell an item for $500, they might start by suggesting $800. When the buyer refuses, they lower the price to $500, making it seem like a fair compromise, even though that was the intended price all along. Employers use the same trick in salary negotiations, initially offering a much lower salary, so that when they reluctantly increase it, the candidate feels like they've won, even if they're still being underpaid. The contrast principle isn't just about money. It affects how we judge people and experiences. If someone goes on a date with a rude, inattentive person and then meets someone who is just mildly polite, they may perceive the second person as exceptionally kind, even if they are only average. This principle is why rebound relationships often feel more intense. The new person seems far better simply because they are being compared to a painful breakup. The dark side of the contrast principle is its potential for manipulation. Abusive relationships often follow a pattern of extreme lows followed by relief, making the abuser seem loving in comparison to their previous cruelty. A toxic boss might overload an employee with impossible tasks, then slightly reduce the pressure, making them feel grateful for what is still an unreasonable workload. This strategy conditions people to accept mistreatment because anything less bad than the worst experience seems like an improvement. To protect yourself from the contrast principle, always step back and evaluate options independently. Ask yourself, would I still see this as a good deal, person, opportunity if I hadn't seen the first one? Compare choices based on their actual value rather than how they stack up against an artificially created reference point. By recognizing when contrast is being used against you, you can make decisions based on logic rather than emotional manipulation. Intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful psychological conditioning techniques, where rewards or positive outcomes are given inconsistently rather than predictably. This unpredictability makes the recipient addicted to seeking approval, validation, or rewards because they never know when the next one is coming. This is the same principle that keeps gamblers hooked on slot machines, social media users glued to their screens, and people trapped in toxic relationships where love and attention are given inconsistently. The human brain craves predictability, but it is even more strongly wired to chase unpredictable rewards. Studies in behavioral psychology show that when rewards are given on a consistent schedule, e.g., receiving praise or money at regular intervals, the motivation to seek them remains steady. But when rewards are unpredictable, sometimes given, sometimes withheld, the anticipation creates a psychological dependency. The uncertainty makes the brain work harder, reinforcing the behavior even more intensely than regular rewards would. This principle is the foundation of gambling addiction. Slot machines do not pay out consistently. They reward players randomly. If people won every third time, they would quickly recognize the pattern and stop playing when the payout was due. But because they might win the next time, or the time after that, they keep pulling the lever, unable to stop chasing the uncertain reward. This is why gambling is so addictive. The possibility of winning becomes more powerful than actually winning. Social media platforms are designed around intermittent reinforcement. When you post something, you don't get the same number of likes or comments every time. Sometimes your post gets a lot of attention, sometimes very little. This unpredictability keeps users engaged, checking their notifications compulsively because they never know when the next dopamine hit is coming. The same mechanism is used in app notifications, email alerts, and news feeds, where unpredictable updates keep people constantly engaged. In relationships, intermittent reinforcement is a key component of emotional manipulation and abuse. A toxic partner might alternate between being loving and distant, creating an emotional roller coaster. The victim clings to the relationship, constantly chasing the rare moments of affection while enduring long stretches of neglect. Because the reward, love, approval, kindness, is given unpredictably, the brain becomes even more attached, just as a gambler keeps playing, hoping for the next win. This same manipulation is used in workplaces where employees are given inconsistent praise, raises, or recognition. If an employer occasionally rewards hard work but often ignores it, employees stay engaged, always trying harder in the hope of receiving another moment of approval. This is why some workers remain in toxic jobs, because sometimes their efforts are noticed, making them believe that if they just work a little harder, the reward will come again. Intermittent reinforcement is also a major tactic in cults, scams, and high-control groups. A leader might shower a follower with love and attention one day, then ignore them the next. The follower works even harder to gain approval again, becoming deeply dependent on the group. Similarly, scammers often give small payouts or fake signs of success before suddenly demanding money or loyalty, keeping victims trapped in a cycle of false hope. One of the most dangerous aspects of intermittent reinforcement is its ability to override logic. Even when people recognize that they are in a harmful situation, the unpredictable reward keeps them hooked. They rationalize the bad times, thinking, if I just wait a little longer, things will get better. This is how people stay in emotionally abusive relationships, gambling addictions, or exploitative work environments, because the next reward always feels just around the corner. To break free from intermittent reinforcement, recognize the pattern. Ask yourself, am I staying in this situation because of consistent rewards or because I'm addicted to occasional validation? If love, recognition, or rewards only come unpredictably, that is a sign of manipulation. Healthy environments provide stability, not emotional whiplash. If you find yourself drawn to situations where rewards are inconsistent, step back and assess whether you are chasing the idea of happiness rather than actual happiness. The strongest defense against intermittent reinforcement is understanding that true fulfillment does not come from unpredictable highs. It comes from consistency, respect, and stability. Once you stop reacting to uncertainty and start seeking stability, you take back control of your own decisions. The fear-then-relief trick. The fear-then-relief trick is a psychological manipulation tactic that exploits emotional highs and lows to make a person more compliant. It works by first inducing fear, anxiety, or stress, and then suddenly relieving it, creating a moment of psychological vulnerability where the target is more likely to agree to a request or comply with a demand. This technique is used in everything from police interrogations and sales tactics to scams and manipulative relationships. The brain is wired to focus intensely on threats. When a person is placed in a state of fear or distress, their critical thinking abilities decline and they become highly reactive. Their primary focus shifts to escaping the discomfort. Then, when the fear is suddenly removed, the relief is so powerful that the person enters a suggestible state. In that moment of relief, they are more likely to comply with whatever is asked of them, simply because their brain is too overwhelmed to resist. A classic example of the fear-then-relief trick occurs in police interrogations. A suspect might be aggressively questioned, accused, and made to believe they are in serious legal trouble. Then, suddenly, the interrogator switches tactics, offering kindness, a drink, or a reassuring statement like, "Look, we just want to help you." The suspect, overwhelmed by the emotional shift, is more likely to confess, even if they didn't commit the crime. Their mind, desperate for safety, clings to the source of relief. This technique is also heavily used in scams. A common telephone scam starts with a caller pretending to be from the IRS, a bank, or a government agency, warning the victim that they are in serious legal or financial trouble. Panic sets in. Then, after letting the fear build, the scammer suddenly offers a way out. "But if you make a payment now, we can fix this." The victim, relieved that there is a solution, complies without thinking critically. The fear-induced panic short-circuits their ability to question whether the threat was real in the first place. In sales and marketing, the fear-then-relief trick is used to pressure people into buying products or services. An insurance agent might emphasize worst-case scenarios. What if your house burns down? What if you lose everything? Causing anxiety. Then they offer relief. But if you sign up today, you'll be completely protected. Similarly, time-sensitive marketing strategies use urgency and fear. Only a few spots left. If you don't act now, you'll miss out, to induce stress before presenting the product as the solution. Manipulative relationships often rely on this tactic as well. A toxic partner might create an argument, make their partner feel guilty or afraid of losing them, and then suddenly shift into affection, saying, "I don't want to fight. I just love you so much." The emotional whiplash makes the victim more likely to forgive mistreatment and comply with their partner's demands. The relief of making up feels so good that it overshadows the initial harm. Workplaces can also use this trick to pressure employees. A boss might imply that an employee is at risk of being fired, causing anxiety, only to later say, "But if you stay late and take on extra work, I think we can keep you on." The worker, overwhelmed by relief, agrees, failing to recognize that they were manipulated into overworking out of fear. The fear then relief trick is so effective because people will do almost anything to escape distress. To defend against it, recognize when fear is being artificially induced. When you feel sudden panic or urgency, pause and ask yourself, am I being manipulated into fear? Is the solution being offered truly my best option? Taking time to breathe and analyze the situation helps prevent snap decisions based on emotional pressure. The more you can resist reacting immediately, the less control manipulators have over you. Reverse psychology. Reverse psychology is a psychological manipulation technique where someone encourages the opposite of what they actually want, knowing that the target will rebel against the suggestion and do what was originally desired. This method exploits the natural human tendency to resist being controlled or told what to do. Instead of directly persuading someone, the manipulator subtly plants a suggestion that plays into their ego, independence, or need to prove themselves. Reverse psychology is effective because people value autonomy. When someone feels that their freedom to choose is being threatened, they often respond with reactance, a psychological pushback against perceived control. By strategically suggesting the opposite of the desired outcome, the manipulator triggers this rebellious response, causing the target to prove them wrong by doing exactly what was intended. Parents frequently use reverse psychology on children. If a child refuses to eat vegetables, instead of begging them to eat, a parent might say, I bet you can't eat all your broccoli. It's too much for you. The child, eager to prove their capability, suddenly becomes motivated to eat. Similarly, a parent might tell a teenager, you probably won't want to clean your room today. You'll wait until next week, knowing that the teen's instinct to assert control will push them to clean sooner just to contradict the expectation. This technique is also widely used in sales and marketing. A luxury brand might advertise a product as not for everyone or only for a select few. The implication is that only special, elite individuals should own it. Consumers, driven by the need to feel unique or prove their status, become more eager to purchase the item. Similarly, a salesperson might say, I don't think this product is the right fit for you. It's more for serious buyers. The potential customer, wanting to prove they are serious, then insists on making the purchase. In social interactions, reverse psychology is often used to manipulate decisions. If someone wants a friend to stay at a party longer, they might say, you should probably just go home. You probably wouldn't have fun if you stayed. The friend, not wanting to appear boring or easily influenced, may decide to stay. A partner who wants more attention might say, I know you're too busy for me today. I'll just do my own thing. The other person, feeling guilty, may then go out of their way to spend time with them. Politicians and media figures also use reverse psychology to shape public opinion. If a leader wants to push a controversial policy, they might start by saying, I know a lot of people will say, this is impossible. The audience, wanting to prove otherwise, becomes more likely to support it. Similarly, when an authority figure claims, no one will believe me, but they create the illusion that the truth is being hidden, making people more likely to buy into their message. Reverse psychology can be a powerful self-improvement tool as well. If someone struggles with motivation, they might tell themselves, I'm probably not going to work out today. It's fine if I just skip it. Their inner resistance kicks in, making them want to prove themselves wrong. Similarly, people who want to break bad habits can manipulate their own minds by saying, I'll just keep doing this unhealthy behavior. I won't stop. The moment they phrase it as a choice rather than a rule, their natural tendency to rebel against control pushes them towards self-discipline. However, reverse psychology can also be dangerous when used manipulatively. A toxic partner might say, you probably don't care about me enough to help with this, making their partner feel guilty and proving their love through compliance. A boss might say, "I doubt you're committed enough to handle this extra work," coercing an employee into working harder. When used maliciously, reverse psychology creates emotional traps where people feel forced to prove themselves by acting against their own best interests. To defend against reverse psychology, be aware of your own instinct to push back against suggestions. When someone makes a statement that triggers defiance, pause and ask yourself, am I making this choice because I truly want to, or because I feel the need to prove something? By recognizing when your independence is being manipulated, you regain control over your decisions. Reverse psychology is one of the most subtle but effective persuasion tactics. When you understand how it works, you can both use it strategically and protect yourself from those who use it against you. The key to mastering it is awareness. Once you recognize the game, you can choose whether or not to play. Planned vulnerability. Planned vulnerability is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone strategically exposes their own weaknesses, insecurities, or struggles to gain trust, sympathy, or control over others. Unlike genuine vulnerability, which fosters real connection and emotional depth, planned vulnerability is a calculated move designed to create an emotional imbalance. The goal is to lower the defenses of the target, making them more likely to open up, trust the manipulator, and feel obligated to reciprocate in some way. The human brain is wired for reciprocity. When someone shares something personal or revealing, we instinctively feel the need to match their openness. This is why conversations between strangers deepen when one person discloses a personal struggle, because the other person feels compelled to do the same. Manipulators exploit this instinct by carefully revealing selective vulnerabilities, knowing that it will encourage their target to share more, trust more, or become emotionally invested. One of the most common places planned vulnerability is used is in romantic manipulation. A toxic partner might share a deeply emotional story early in the relationship, perhaps about a traumatic past, a betrayal, or a painful experience, to make their new partner feel instantly close to them. By appearing emotionally raw, they create an illusion of intimacy, making the other person feel special for being chosen as their confidant. Once the target is emotionally hooked, the manipulator can begin exerting control, often using their past pain as an excuse for toxic behaviors. In the workplace, planned vulnerability is used to gain influence over colleagues or subordinates. A manipulative boss might say, "I'm under so much pressure from upper management. I don't know how I'm going to keep this team together." This tactic makes employees feel sympathetic and obligated to overwork or sacrifice personal boundaries to help the boss. Similarly, a coworker might frequently talk about how overwhelmed they are, subtly guilt-tripping others into covering for them. Salespeople and con artists use planned vulnerability to gain trust. A scammer posing as an investor might say, "I've made mistakes in the past, but I finally found a system that works. Trust me, I wouldn't lead you wrong." By appearing humble and relatable, they make their pitch feel more genuine. The same strategy is used in political and media manipulation. A leader might publicly share a personal struggle to appear more relatable, softening their image and making people more forgiving of their actions. Planned vulnerability is especially effective in social manipulation. Someone trying to establish control in a friendship group might share exaggerated or fabricated personal struggles, positioning themselves as the wounded one who needs protection. By doing this, they create a sense of duty in others, ensuring that they always receive attention, special treatment, or immunity from criticism. The darker side of this tactic is that it creates emotional debt. When someone shares their struggles, the listener feels a psychological obligation to support, comfort, or protect them. Over time, this can be exploited, making the target feel guilty for setting boundaries or questioning the manipulator's actions. This is why victims of emotional manipulation often find it hard to walk away. They feel responsible for helping the person who played vulnerable to gain their trust. To defend against planned vulnerability, pay attention to patterns. Ask yourself, does this person always seem to share their struggles when they need something? Or do I feel emotionally pressured after they open up? Genuine vulnerability happens naturally over time, while manipulative vulnerability often appears strategically early in relationships or at moments when the manipulator wants something. Protect yourself by offering compassion without obligation. Just because someone shares a struggle does not mean you are responsible for fixing it. Guilt seeding. Guilt seeding is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone subtly implants guilt into another person's mind, making them feel responsible for things they shouldn't. Unlike direct guilt tripping, which is overt and obvious, guilt seeding works subtly, planting small, indirect remarks or implications that take root over time. The goal is to make the target feel they owe the manipulator something, shaping their behavior without the need for direct confrontation. The reason guilt seeding is so effective is that guilt is a powerful emotional driver. When people feel guilty, they are more likely to comply, apologize, overcompensate, or seek approval. Manipulators use this to control others, ensuring that their target remains anxious about doing the right thing, even when no wrongdoing has occurred. One of the most common places guilt seeding appears is in family dynamics. A parent might say, "I sacrifice so much for you. You don't call me enough." The child, even if they have been attentive, now feels an internalized guilt that makes them overcompensate by calling more often, even at the cost of their own well-being. Similarly, a partner might say, "I always put you first, but sometimes I feel like I'm not a priority." This plants a seed of doubt, making the other person feel they are failing, even if they have done nothing wrong. In friendships, guilt seeding is used to create one-sided emotional labor. A friend might say, "I guess I shouldn't expect people to be there for me like I am for them." Even if the listener has been supportive, they suddenly feel as if they haven't done enough. Over time, this conditions them to constantly prove their loyalty, bending over backward to meet the manipulator's needs. Workplaces are also breeding grounds for guilt seeding. A boss might say, "I really thought you were someone we could count on," when an employee refuses to take on extra work. The employee, even if they have been a dedicated worker, now feels a sense of shame and pressure to comply. Manipulative colleagues might use similar tactics. "Wow, must be nice to have time off. Some of us have to stay and finish the work." The implication is that taking time for oneself is selfish, even if it is well-earned. Guilt seeding is also commonly used in romantic relationships. A partner might sigh and say, "It's fine, I'm just used to doing things alone." Even though no direct accusation is made, the listener now feels guilty for not being available. Another common example is, "You probably don't even miss me when I'm gone." This subtle remark forces the other person to prove their love and loyalty, reinforcing a cycle of emotional control. One of the most insidious aspects of guilt seeding is that it often goes unnoticed until its effects have already taken hold. Unlike outright accusations, which can be easily challenged, guilt-seeded remarks linger in the subconscious, making the target doubt themselves. Over time, the victim may internalize guilt, becoming hyper-aware of their actions and constantly seeking approval from the manipulator. To defend against guilt seeding, recognize when guilt is being implanted without reason. Ask yourself, am I truly responsible for this, or am I just feeling guilty because of how it was framed? Healthy relationships allow room for open discussion, while manipulative ones use guilt to create silent compliance. If someone repeatedly makes you feel guilty without clear reasons, set boundaries. A good response to guilt seeding is, "I understand how you feel, but I won't take responsibility for something I haven't done." Calling out the pattern forces the manipulator to either clarify their feelings or drop the act. Guilt is a normal human emotion, but when it is planted deliberately as a tool of control, it becomes a weapon. The key to resisting guilt seeding is to separate real responsibility from manipulated obligation. Once you become aware of how guilt is being used against you, you can break free from its grip, ensuring that your decisions are based on personal choice, not artificial guilt imposed by others. False consensus effect. The false consensus effect is a psychological manipulation technique where someone makes you believe that a particular opinion, behavior, or decision is widely accepted, when in reality it might not be. This tactic exploits the natural human tendency to assume that others think the same way we do, creating social pressure to conform. The goal is to make the target feel as though they are in the minority if they disagree, which increases the likelihood of compliance or self-doubt. At its core, the false consensus effect works because the brain is wired for social validation. People naturally want to fit in, and when they believe that everyone else thinks or behaves a certain way, they are more likely to align with that perceived majority, even if it contradicts their own beliefs or values. This effect is widely used in sales, politics, social groups, and relationships to influence behavior without direct coercion. One of the most common uses of the false consensus effect is in advertising and marketing. Brands often claim 9 out of 10 people prefer this product, or millions of customers can't be wrong, to create the illusion that their product is the obvious choice. Even without real data to back up these claims, the psychological pressure to conform makes consumers more likely to buy. Similarly, social media influencers use phrases like, "Everyone is talking about this," or "People are obsessed with this trend," to create artificial popularity, encouraging followers to jump on the bandwagon. In political and social movements, the false consensus effect is used to shape public opinion. A manipulative leader might say, "The vast majority of people support this policy," even if that isn't true. By making dissenters feel like outliers, the tactic discourages them from speaking up. Media outlets often reinforce this effect by selectively presenting opinions that align with their agenda while downplaying or ignoring opposing views. Over time, this creates the illusion that one perspective is dominant, making people hesitate to challenge it. This tactic is also commonly used in workplaces and group settings. A manipulative boss might say, "Everyone here agrees that we need to work extra hours to meet this deadline," pressuring employees to comply, even if no one actually agrees. Similarly, a team leader might state, "We've all decided to go with this plan," making dissenters feel like they are disrupting group unity. By framing an idea as the default choice, individuals feel socially isolated if they challenge it. In relationships, the false consensus effect can be used to enforce control. A manipulative partner might say, "All my exes thought I was the best partner they ever had," or "Everyone would agree that you're overreacting." This tactic makes the victim doubt their feelings and instincts, making them more likely to submit to the manipulator's version of reality. Similarly, in friendships, someone might say, "Everyone thinks you're being selfish," when, in reality, only the manipulator feels that way. Even scams and frauds use this principle. A con artist might say, "Most people in your position invest in this opportunity," making the target feel foolish for not participating. Multi-level marketing, MLM schemes often push the idea that thousands of people are making money with this to create an illusion of widespread success, when in reality, most participants are losing money. To defend against the false consensus effect, always verify claims of majority opinion. Ask yourself, who exactly is everyone? Do I have independent evidence that this is true? When faced with broad generalizations like "everyone thinks this" or "no one disagrees with me," challenge the speaker to provide proof. If they can't, they may be manipulating you into conformity. Trust your own judgment and seek diverse perspectives before making decisions. Understanding the false consensus effect allows you to break free from artificial peer pressure. Just because something is presented as a widespread belief doesn't mean it actually is. By questioning narratives that rely on vague collective approval, you maintain the ability to think independently and make choices based on reality, not manipulation. Forced commitment. Forced commitment is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone pressures you into making a choice or agreeing to something before you have had the time to think it through. Once you commit, even in a small way, you feel psychologically trapped, making it much harder to back out later. This technique exploits the brain's natural tendency to seek consistency, turning minor agreements into major obligations over time. The power of forced commitment lies in the commitment and consistency principle, a well-documented cognitive bias. When people take an initial step towards something, they feel internal pressure to remain consistent with that choice, even if new information suggests it's a bad idea. This is why small, seemingly harmless commitments often escalate into full compliance. One of the most common uses of forced commitment is in sales and marketing. A car dealership might start by asking, "Wouldn't you love to drive a car like this?" If the customer agrees, even hypothetically, they have taken a mental step toward ownership. The salesperson then builds on that commitment by asking them to take a test drive, then fill out some paperwork just in case, and before they know it, they feel psychologically invested in buying the car. This method, known as the yes ladder, gradually increases commitment until backing out feels unnatural. Another example of forced commitment appears in subscription-based services. Many companies offer free trials that require credit card information up front. By signing up, the customer has already made a small commitment, which increases the likelihood that they will continue the service rather than cancel when the trial ends. Even if they don't actively want the service, they feel reluctant to go through the cancellation process because they have already engaged. In workplaces, forced commitment is often used to exploit employees. A boss might say, "Could you stay just an extra 30 minutes today?" Once the employee agrees, the request gradually increases. Soon, they are regularly working unpaid overtime. Similarly, a company might assign an employee to temporarily handle extra responsibilities, only to make those responsibilities permanent once the person has accepted them. In relationships, forced commitment can be used to control a partner. A manipulative person might start with small favors. "Can you do this one little thing for me?" And once their partner complies, the favors grow larger. Over time, the victim feels obligated to continue fulfilling demands, even when they become unreasonable. In toxic relationships, this tactic can be escalated to the point where the victim feels completely trapped. Cults, extremist groups, and high-control organizations use incremental commitment to recruit and retain members. They begin with minor engagements, such as attending a meeting or signing a petition. Then, they escalate the commitment with social rituals, financial contributions, and ideological loyalty tests. Once someone has invested time, effort, or money, they feel compelled to stay, even if doubts arise, because walking away would mean admitting they were wrong. Forced commitment is also weaponized in scams and frauds. A scammer might ask a victim to agree to something harmless. "Can I send you more information?" Once the victim says yes, the scammer pushes further, increasing the pressure step by step. By the time money is involved, the victim feels deeply entangled and struggles to say no. The key to defending against forced commitment is recognizing when you are being pressured into premature agreement. Ask yourself, would I still make this commitment if I had more time to think? If someone is rushing you into a decision, Take a step back, refuse to commit under pressure, and if necessary, say, "I need time to think about this." Genuine opportunities allow for thoughtful decision-making. Manipulative ones rely on urgency and commitment traps. By understanding forced commitment, you can break free from escalating obligations and make decisions on your own terms. When you resist the pressure to commit prematurely, you maintain control over your choices and prevent yourself from falling into psychological traps that exploit your natural desire for consistency. Deliberate misinterpretation. Deliberate misinterpretation is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone intentionally twists your words, ideas, or intentions to make you appear wrong, guilty, or unreasonable. This technique is used to confuse, discredit, or gaslight the target, making them doubt their own communication skills or feel the need to over-explain themselves. The goal is to shift power in the conversation, forcing the target into a defensive position while the manipulator takes control of the narrative. This tactic works because humans instinctively want to correct misunderstandings. When someone distorts what we say, we feel an urgent need to clarify or defend ourselves. Manipulators exploit this by constantly misrepresenting statements, creating endless loops of justification where the target wastes energy, proving something that should have been obvious. One of the most common uses of deliberate misinterpretation is in arguments and debates. A manipulative person might take an innocent remark and twist it into an offensive or ridiculous statement. For example, if you say, "I think we should save more money this year," they might respond, "Oh, so now you think I'm irresponsible?" This forces you to defend something you never actually said, shifting the conversation from the real issue to a fabricated accusation. In politics and media, this technique is widely used to discredit opponents. A politician might say, "We need to regulate certain industries," and the opposition distorts it as, "They want to destroy businesses and kill jobs." This deliberate twisting of words makes it harder to have rational discussions, as people become focused on correcting false narratives rather than discussing actual policies. Similarly, headlines in the media often exaggerate or misinterpret statements to stir outrage and emotional reactions, driving engagement while obscuring the truth. In toxic relationships, deliberate misinterpretation is a common tool for gaslighting. A manipulative partner might take a neutral statement like, "I need some alone time," and respond with, "So you don't love me anymore?" Or, "You just want an excuse to ignore me." This forces the other person into a defensive stance, making them feel guilty for something they never intended. Over time, this can make the victim second-guess their own words and feel like they can never communicate correctly. This tactic is also used in workplace manipulation. A boss might distort an employee's request for fair treatment as, "You just don't want to work hard," or "You're being difficult." Colleagues who want to undermine someone may twist a harmless statement into something offensive, creating unnecessary conflicts and damaging reputations. Even in legal and interrogation settings, deliberate misinterpretation is used to extract confessions or discredit witnesses. A lawyer might take a minor inconsistency in a statement and exaggerate it, making the person seem unreliable. Police interrogators might intentionally reframe an answer in a misleading way, pressuring the suspect to clarify, and in doing so, accidentally say something incriminating. To defend against deliberate misinterpretation, refuse to play into the manipulator's trap. Instead of rushing to defend yourself, calmly redirect the conversation by saying, "That's not what I said. Let's focus on what I actually meant." If someone constantly misrepresents your words, recognize that they may be doing it intentionally to manipulate you. Stay firm, clarify once, and do not engage in endless justifications. Recognizing this tactic allows you to maintain control over your own words and not let others redefine your reality. When you stop reacting emotionally and start recognizing manipulation for what it is, you regain power in conversations and protect yourself from being unfairly discredited. Confession triggers. Confession triggers are a psychological manipulation tactic where a person is subtly pressured or tricked into revealing private information, admitting guilt, or confessing to something they wouldn't normally disclose. This tactic is used in interrogations, personal relationships, and even casual social interactions to extract sensitive information without direct confrontation. The key to confession triggers is making the target feel that confessing is the safest or most logical choice, even when it isn't. The human brain is wired to seek relief from guilt and discomfort. If someone feels accused, even subtly, they may instinctively confess or overshare to relieve tension. Manipulators exploit this by creating situations where the target feels they must justify themselves, admit wrongdoing, or reveal personal secrets to avoid consequences. One of the most well-known uses of confession triggers is in police interrogations. Investigators use tactics like, "We already know what happened, just tell us the details." This makes the suspect feel that confessing is inevitable, even if they are innocent. Another common strategy is, "If you cooperate now, things will be easier for you," creating the illusion that confessing is the best way to avoid harsher punishment. These tactics are so effective that they have led to false confessions, where innocent people admit to crimes they didn't commit simply because they were psychologically manipulated into it. In personal relationships, confession triggers can be used to extract secrets or create guilt. A manipulative partner might say, "I already know what you did. Just be honest with me." Even if the person hasn't done anything wrong, they may start searching their memory for something to confess, fearing that the accuser has some kind of evidence. Another common technique is using silence as a pressure tool, pausing and staring after a vague accusation, making the target feel so uncomfortable that they fill the silence by admitting something they never planned to. Confession triggers are also widely used in workplaces and social circles. A boss might say, "I've been hearing things about you. Do you have anything you want to tell me?" Even if the employee has done nothing wrong, they might panic and over-explain, accidentally revealing information that can be used against them. A gossiping friend might say, "A lot of people think you have something to hide," prompting the target to confess to something just to clear their name. This tactic is frequently used in scams and financial fraud. A scammer posing as an official might call someone and say, "We've detected suspicious activity on your account. Can you confirm your recent transactions?" The victim, caught off guard, might reveal personal financial details in an attempt to clear their name. Similarly, fake customer service representatives often pressure people into verifying sensitive information by implying that they are already under investigation. In childhood and parenting, confession triggers are often used unintentionally. A parent might say, "I already know what happened, so you might as well tell me." Even if the child is innocent, they may confess to something minor just to avoid further suspicion. While this can be an effective parenting tool, it can also create long-term anxiety, teaching children to fear authority rather than understand right and wrong. To defend against confession triggers, recognize when you are being pressured to confess unnecessarily. Ask yourself, do they actually have evidence, or are they fishing for information? If someone says, "I already know," but refuses to provide specifics, it's likely a manipulation tactic. The best response is to stay calm and ask, "What exactly are you referring to?" This forces the manipulator to reveal whether they actually know something or are just bluffing. Another way to protect yourself is to avoid over-explaining. If you haven't done anything wrong, you don't need to prove your innocence. Instead of rushing to justify yourself, stay neutral and ask for clarification. If a situation feels like a psychological trap, take a step back before responding. Confession triggers are designed to make you feel obligated to reveal information, but once you recognize the tactic, you can avoid falling into the trap. The key to resisting manipulation is staying calm, refusing to engage in unnecessary justifications, and recognizing when someone is trying to make you confess without real cause. By controlling your responses, you maintain power over your personal information and prevent yourself from being manipulated into self-incrimination. Pacing and leading. Pacing and leading is a psychological manipulation technique where a person first mirrors the emotions, behaviors, or thoughts of their target and then gradually guides them toward a desired outcome. This tactic works by building a sense of trust and familiarity, making the target feel understood and comfortable before they are subtly directed toward a specific decision, belief, or action. The reason this technique is so effective is that humans are naturally drawn to people who reflect their own emotions and experiences. When someone feels that another person gets them, they are far more likely to accept guidance or follow suggestions. Manipulators exploit this by first aligning themselves with their target's mood, speech patterns, or concerns, then shifting the interaction toward their intended goal. One of the most common uses of pacing and leading occurs in sales and negotiations. A skilled salesperson might start by agreeing with a customer's concerns, saying something like, "I completely understand why you'd want to think about this first. Big decisions take time." This pacing creates a sense of alignment. Then, once trust is built, they start leading by saying, "That's why most of our customers take advantage of this limited time offer. It gives them peace of mind while still locking in the best price." Because the customer feels understood, they are more likely to comply. In social interactions and persuasion, pacing and leading is used to influence group dynamics. A manipulative leader or influencer might first adopt the language, frustrations, or beliefs of their audience, saying, "I know how frustrating it is when politicians don't listen to us." This makes them seem relatable. Then, once rapport is established, they begin leading by stating, "That's why we need to stand together and support this movement." By pacing the emotions of their followers first, they make their directive feel natural rather than forced. In relationships, pacing and leading can be used for both genuine bonding and manipulation. A manipulative partner might start by mirroring their significant other's interests, routines, or emotional struggles, saying, "I totally feel the same way about relationships. Trust is everything." Once emotional closeness is established, they slowly start leading, introducing new behaviors or expectations, such as, "Since we trust each other so much, let's not have passwords on our phones." The partner, feeling safe from the earlier pacing, may comply without realizing they are being led into a control dynamic. This tactic is also heavily used in therapy, hypnosis, and influence tactics. A hypnotist might begin by stating obvious truths, such as, "You're sitting comfortably in this chair, breathing naturally," which makes the target subconsciously agree. Then, once the subject is in sync, they introduce suggestions like, "And as you relax deeper, you may start to feel lighter, as if you're floating." Because the pacing statements were true, the brain is more likely to accept the leading statement. In business and leadership, managers use pacing and leading to gain compliance from employees. A boss might first align with their team's frustrations by saying, "I know this project is demanding, and we're all feeling the pressure to establish trust." Then they shift toward leadership by adding, "That's exactly why we need to push through these next few weeks together." The transition from acknowledgement to directive feels natural, making resistance less likely. While pacing and leading is not inherently negative, it can be used for positive influence, like helping someone through a difficult situation. It is a tool often misused for manipulation. To defend against it, Be aware of when someone is mirroring your emotions, speech, or behaviors before steering the conversation in a specific direction. Ask yourself, am I being guided toward a decision, or am I making this choice independently? If someone's agreement feels strategic rather than genuine, take a step back and reassess the situation before allowing them to lead you. The Decoy Effect. The decoy effect is a psychological manipulation strategy where a less attractive option is introduced to make another option seem more desirable. This trick is widely used in marketing, pricing strategies, and decision-making influence, subtly pushing people toward the choice that benefits the manipulator. The key to the decoy effect is presenting three options, two main ones, and a third that is strategically designed to make one of the main choices seem far better in comparison. The human brain struggles with absolute value, but excels at relative comparisons. When faced with two choices, people often find it hard to decide. But when a third, strategically placed decoy is introduced, the best option suddenly becomes obvious. This is why companies, negotiators, and influencers carefully structure choices to nudge people in a specific direction. One of the most well-known examples of the decoy effect occurs in pricing strategies. Imagine a coffee shop offers two cup sizes, a small for $3 and a large for $6. Some customers might hesitate to spend $6 on a large, making the decision difficult. Now, the shop introduces a decoy, a medium for $5.50. The medium price makes the large seem like a far better deal. It's only 50 cents more for a much bigger size. Most people, wanting the best value, now choose the large, even though they might not have considered it before. The medium option wasn't meant to sell. It was introduced only to make the large more attractive. This tactic is also heavily used in technology and subscription services. A streaming company might offer a basic plan for $7 per month with limited features, a premium plan for $15 per month with all features, and an ultra plan for $14.50 per month with all features plus a minor extra. Here, the ultra plan is a decoy. It's designed to push customers toward the premium plan because it seems like a better deal. Without the decoy, many people would hesitate to pay $15, but when faced with a slightly more expensive ultra plan, the premium plan suddenly looks like a bargain. The decoy effect is also used in politics and negotiations. If a government wants to pass a controversial policy, they might propose three options. An extreme version of the policy as a decoy, the actual policy they want, which now appears as a moderate choice, and no policy change at all. By making their actual policy look like the reasonable middle ground, they increase the chances of public support, even if it would have been rejected in a two-choice scenario. In real estate, agents use the decoy effect by showing potential buyers three homes. The first is a rundown, overpriced house meant to be the decoy. The second is a good house at a fair price, which is the intended option. The third is a decent house at a slightly lower price but with fewer appealing features. By including the decoy, the good house now seems like the best choice, guiding the buyer toward the desired purchase. The decoy effect is even used in dating and social influence. A person who wants to seem more attractive might strategically surround themselves with a less attractive friend. By comparison, they appear more appealing. This is why some people choose wingmen or wingwomen who make them stand out rather than compete for attention. To defend against the decoy effect, always analyze whether an option exists solely to make another choice seem better. Ask yourself, would I have considered this option if the third one didn't exist? And am I being pushed toward a choice because of real value or because of a manipulated comparison? By recognizing when a third option is influencing your decision, you regain the ability to evaluate choices independently. The decoy effect works because it frames decisions in a way that alters perception. But once you understand how it functions, you can step back and assess what truly matters to you. Knowing this tactic helps you avoid being nudged into decisions that benefit someone else rather than yourself. The best way to resist manipulation is to judge options on their own merit, not just how they compare to cleverly placed distractions. False equivalence. False equivalence is a psychological manipulation tactic where two things are presented as being equal or comparable when, in reality, they are not. This technique is often used in debates, politics, media, and personal conflicts to create the illusion of balance, justify unethical behavior, or dismiss valid concerns. By falsely equating two different ideas, actions, or people, the manipulator distorts perception and misleads their audience into believing that both sides of an argument are equally valid or equally flawed. This tactic is effective because the human brain is drawn to symmetry and fairness. When presented with two opposing views, people naturally assume that both must have some merit. Manipulators exploit this by making unequal things appear equal, forcing their target into a false dilemma or an unnecessary compromise. One of the most common examples of false equivalence is in politics. A politician caught in a corruption scandal might respond by saying, "Well, my opponent isn't perfect either." This falsely equates serious wrongdoing with minor mistakes, shifting focus away from accountability. Similarly, during debates on social justice issues, some people might argue discrimination exists on both sides, equating systemic oppression with isolated incidents of bias. By presenting two vastly different situations as the same, the goal is to downplay or dismiss the more serious issue. In the media, false equivalence is used to create the illusion of objectivity. News outlets, in an attempt to appear unbiased, often give equal airtime to opposing viewpoints, even when one side is based on facts and the other is misinformation. For example, scientific debates about climate change or vaccines often feature a professional expert on one side and an unqualified skeptic on the other, making it seem as if both arguments hold equal weight, when, in reality, they do not. False equivalence is also common in personal relationships and arguments. A manipulative partner might say, "We both made mistakes," after being caught cheating, equating their infidelity with their partner forgetting an anniversary. A toxic friend might claim, "You ignored my text last week, so how is that different from me not showing up to your event?" By equating minor or justified actions with major betrayals, they attempt to avoid accountability and guilt, trip the other person into accepting an unfair situation. In business and workplace settings, false equivalence is often used to justify unethical practices. A company might argue, "All businesses cut corners," to excuse dangerous cost-cutting measures, as if normal workplace efficiency is the same as illegal negligence. Employees who protest unfair treatment might hear, "Everyone gets stressed at work," equating reasonable job pressure with abusive management. False equivalence is also weaponized in online debates. If someone criticizes a harmful ideology or group, a manipulative respondent might say, "Well, both sides have extremists." While technically true, this statement ignores the scale, context, and impact of each group's actions. By framing all positions as equally extreme, the manipulator prevents meaningful discussion and justifies harmful beliefs or behaviors. To defend against false equivalence, always analyze whether two things are truly comparable. Ask yourself, are these situations equal in impact, scale, and intent? Just because two things share a surface similarity does not mean they carry the same weight. When confronted with this tactic, push back by highlighting key differences and refusing to accept false comparisons. Recognizing false equivalence allows you to see through attempts to distort reality, ensuring that your judgments are based on fairness rather than misleading comparisons.